Welcome back to the Best Damn Nerd Show, everybody. Tonight, our main topic will be an extravaganza. We are going to be talking all things X-Men, one of our favorites from the classic run that we had on the Best Damn Nerd Show. But we're going to be getting back into it tonight. But before we do that, how's everybody doing? And happy belated birthday to one Jeff Budd.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, don't everybody else echo the happy birthday at once. But
Nobody
Jeff,
else cares.
How was your birthday? What sort of nerdy shenanigans did you get into?
Birthday was great. I think I was telling you before it that I was worried because of my advanced age and marital status that my parents would not buy me a board game. But fortunately, my Mice and Mystics collection is complete.
Excellent. Explain for the uninitiated, what is Mice and Mystics?
Mice and Mystics, and Chris, you feel free to pop into because I know what a fan you are. It's sword and sorcery, except for that you play as like little mice and other small like rodent type characters, and you're exploring a castle or other settings. It's like your classic dungeon crawler board game. If you're familiar with Hero Quest or Descent, Warhammer Quest, those types of games, it's where like you're placing down different room tiles and there's a story objective. Each board game or expansion, it's kind of like a storybook, and so the quests go in order, like chapters, and it has like a final ending, which is really cool. And this is the third expansion, and it's the last one they've done so far, so it'll be nice to have all of that together.
I remember playing it with you, Jeff, and we had the devil of a time getting past what I think even like the second or third quest or something like that.
Yeah, was it because of Brody the cat? Yeah, exactly. And
yes.
Yeah, you guys went up to the kitchen, didn't you?
We went up to the kitchen so that we could get the bonus points or something like that. Yeah, you know exactly which quest we're talking about.
I gotta get all the loot drops, it's
it's all about the lore and exploring all the side quests and things like that. There's some really good side quests that involve similar things in Heart of Glorm, which was the second expansion, which I bought at like the beginning of quarantine. And then now I've got this, which I'm really looking forward to getting into. And then I also got some model paints and stuff because I'm going to be painting my miniatures for different games. I will eventually do it for Mice and Mystics also, which I'm pretty excited about. But I'm not going to start with them. They're precious.
That's awesome. I'm looking forward to checking out more of those expansions because I only played the base game, if I'm not mistaken, and
that's all I own.
Yeah, barely at that. Davis, what about you? How was your week in nerd?
Quarantine continues, so I was struggling. I've been on the road. I don't have access to all my outlets, so it's been tough, but I do have my Switch with me, so that's been nice, and that's been my one escape from this travel that we've been on for about a month now. So since sports has been gone, I actually downloaded a basketball game, NBA 2K20. I created a player that is
what position do you play?
I'm a point guard, shooting guard. I like to shoot the rock a lot. So
nice.
And it's not going well. It's a tough game. I don't think I'm advancing as fast as I should be. So I'm still coming off the bench and trying to make my way.
I actually still don't have a Switch, just on the PS and the Xbox. What is your assessment of the Switch in terms of how much you like it?
There just isn't a ton of games I've been interested in, but I also haven't looked that much into it because I've been on PS4 so much. I definitely played Breath of the Wild until almost about 100 hours.
Shame.
And
I like Skyrim also.
Jackass.
Shame.
And
I like Skyrim, but limit the story. Yeah, that sounds cool.
So much more. Get the game. And then there's just a bunch of indie games on there that I've been trying out that I usually get about 10 to 20 hours in, and then I switch. So
hence the name. Marco, what have you been up to?
This past week I actually read a comic from Mark Millar and Raphael Albuquerque. It's called Prodigy, which was amazing, and it's supposedly getting adapted into like a Netflix TV show or movie, because a couple years back, Mark Millar, if you guys don't know, he was creator of Kick-Ass and also wrote Superman, Red Sun, things like that. but he has his own imprint of comic books that he sold to Netflix. And so they're going to be adapting a ton of his properties into series and shows exclusive to the network. And so Prodigy is one of his newer ones, which follows the adventures of Edison Crane, who's like the world's smartest man, who is just bored with normal life activity. So he's always looking for new challenges and puzzles to solve and things. And basically comes across this evil plan by this cult to merge our world with this evil Earth and destroy the entire planet. And so he's going through like these hunts, like kind of treasure hunts to the Tower of Babel and things of that nature to foil this plot. Awesome. Really good, fast-paced, Mark Millar at his best. And I mean, Albuquerque's art is just stunning always. So definitely give it a recommendation and can't wait for the Netflix adaptation.
Very cool. Very cool.
It is
also
cool, James.
If I had 10
More
cents
enthusiasm
for
from
every
you, sir.
world's smartest man who is doing something screwy in comics, I'd have like $1.50 maybe.
As soon as I heard world's smartest man, I just thought of Ozymandias. And it's like the world's smartest man poses no more threat to me than its smartest termite.
Well, what's great is the way they like showcase how he's smart and how he thinks through things. Like there's all these inner shots of his head of these different Edison Cranes, like solving problems. So like one of his subconscious beings is solving this meteor, or rather this asteroid that's going to come and collide with the Earth in 2 years, trying to solve that. Another one's playing like the World Chess Championships. The other one's solving this puzzle. This other one's creating like a new overture for an opera, and just constantly getting requests from different people. It's really fun how it was all packed together, instead of just being, yeah, he's a smart guy. Yeah, he's smart. It was
sounds like a poor man's Doc Savage. Or dare I say,
Yeah.
a poor man's Buckaroo Banzai. Hang up on this guy.
No, he's the richest man in the world too. He's just buying hospitals and shit.
No, it's Bruce Wayne also. How
Buying
original.
hospitals, yeah. Is that where the profit is?
Very cool. You're soaking in him.
Operating a hospital?
He's a prodigy.
Yeah, I got
So
the
is Doc
title.
Savage. Pick up a book, you Philistine.
Doc Savage.
Well,
No one cares about Doc Savage.
they will again when The Rock plays him in a movie. They absolutely will. I want to circle back to Jeff actually because I skipped over something that's long overdue in our friendship. But many moons ago, Jeff gave me the Iron Tower trilogy, and I finally started reading it. I finished the first book, The Dark Tide, and I'm really enjoying it. First of all, but
I knew you would.
at various points though, it is extremely heavy-handed, lifting left and right from Tolkien and Lord of the Rings, like making
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
making no bones about it. But Jeff, you have an explanation as to why that is. I really thought this was a cool story. It's funny, and then so reading it, you can just see the strings of it. But why is it a Lord of the Rings ripoff?
So yeah, the Iron Tower trilogy is written by Dennis L. McKiernan, and I think these are like the first books that he ever published. He was like a journalist or something before that. He got into a motorcycle accident and was hospitalized in the 80s, and then what he did was, to pass the time, he wrote a sequel to Lord of the Rings just as a fan. And then he tried to sell that to the Tolkien estate. He's like, here's a duology, just 2 books, nice sequel to Lord of the Rings. And they said, no, we are not interested. And also, if you try to publish that, we will sue you into oblivion. And so he reworked the story. So it took place in another world, very Middle Earth adjacent, Mythgar. And then you can't just publish a sequel without the original story. So he had to write his own Lord of the Rings trilogy in this Mythgar world. And so, yeah, there's some slight differences. I read it before I read Lord of the Rings, so I just enjoyed it as a fantasy story.
You just thought Tolkien was the hack.
Well, no, and then once I read Tolkien, I was like, oh, he really is the godfather of all fantasy, isn't he? You know, and no offense to Dennis L. McKiernan, because everybody says it too. Fantasy in like the 70s and 80s, a lot of people say skip out on it because it's all Tolkien clones. I'm a fan of Tolkien. I don't mind reading stories that are kind of like Lord of the Rings. So, I mean, that's all right in my wheelhouse. The Iron Tower trilogy, it got me into fantasy. It got me into like super recreational reading outside of comic books. I'll always be grateful to Dennis L. McKiernan and that series. I've read the sequel that he wrote beforehand. It's called the Silver Call duology. I don't want to get into it too much, James,
Got
because
it.
you haven't gotten into why they would even do that for the sequel yet, and we can talk about that afterwards. But yeah, I'm a fan of Dennis L. McKiernan. I'm a fan of a lot of things, and it's thanks to him. So I'm
And-
so glad that I got to share this with you now. I'm rereading it just so that I can have like up-to-date conversations with you and know what it is that you're referencing. But yeah, I've reread it a couple times in my life, but it's been a lot of years, so it's nice to revisit. It's like seeing an old friend.
Well, I am remiss for waiting so long to actually read it. I should have started obviously a long time ago. I'm happy that I finally did, and I mean, I really, despite all of the things that we just laid out, it is a really enjoyable read. There are certain aspects that I actually like better in the first book in terms of how he handles the halflings a little bit too, or the halfling equivalents. But you mentioned how a lot of the fantasy in the 70s and 80s was just Tolkien pastiche. It's all still pretty much Tolkien pastiche anyway, so
now I feel though it's like a couple of generations removed. So now people are ripping off people who had either ripped off Tolkien or may have ripped off somebody else who had ripped off Tolkien. So you do get a more watered down. You have those people that are like doing anti-Tolkien, and I'm not trying to call out George R.R. Martin because I'm not even sure if that's exactly what he's doing. I mean, he, on the other hand, is nothing but complimentary of Tolkien's work. But you do have people that are trying to put its own, like a twist to it, or change it up to a certain degree. But I mean, you can only move away from it so much.
George R.R. Martin is just a Tolkien fan who also was a fan of I, Claudius. That's all I'll take from with George R.R. Martin. But I am really enjoying the Iron Tower trilogy, so I'm looking forward to talking more about it. I want to start this segment with how we all got into the X-Men, and this is something that is true for a few comic properties, because as when I was younger, I wasn't necessarily reading comics in order. I would buy comics based on what cover I thought looked good and read those stories, but I wasn't necessarily, on a pull sheet or anything like that when I was growing up. But what really got me introduced to the X-Men and sort of their whole mythos and canon was the Marvel Masterpiece card collection, specifically the art done by like Joe Jusko and stuff like that. I mean, it is just incredibly evocative and amazing artwork that he did of so many superheroes, but really the Marvel Masterpieces, and specifically, that around that time period, that was my introduction in a lot of ways to the X-Men and sort of figuring out their whole story. But for you guys, how did you first become exposed to the X-Men? Professor Chris Davis, since you are from the School for Gifted Youngsters, we'll start with you.
Well, mine probably went in reverse order, I would say, because the first introduction I had was in the arcade. It was from the beat 'em up X-Men 6-player, everyone just huddled around, just pounding quarters in, because you die so easy, because every time you use your powers, your life drains. So it was really counterintuitive when you think about it.
Yeah, it was annoying.
It definitely made you spend a lot of money, that's for sure.
It's a brilliant business model in that sense.
As all those games, just, man, we pumped so much money into them. Thank you to my parents for providing the money. So,
well, I also understand that you still have, in terms of beyond the arcade, the VHS tape of Pride of the X-Men, and that was another sort of intro into the characters for you.
Yeah, so that is what kind of escalated everything. My mom saw me playing this arcade game so much, she got me this VHS, Pride of the X-Men, which was the kickoff for the animated series, and I still have it. The cover is definitely torn to shreds, and it's not in great condition, so I don't think I could ever sell it. But I do have
Why
it.
would you want to?
I wouldn't. It's a collector's item, even if it's torn. And then, as a kid, I also didn't have cable growing up, so I didn't get Fox, and that wasn't even cable. And so I only got to watch the animated series when I went to a friend's house or my grandparents, and it became that much more of a treat for me. And so anytime I got to watch it, it was just like this extra thrill. And so it definitely still held, I think, a higher place than some of the other cartoons for me because it meant that much more when I watched it. And then later on in life, and then the video games. Growing up, the Sega Genesis X-Men. We'll get into those later, I know, but I was really into that. Some of the original Xbox games. And then as I got older and got more into comics, probably in my later high school years, I really started getting more into the base stories that we're going to go into a lot. That's the Phoenix Saga, House of M, stuff like that. So that's from then on, it's just been X-Men has been my favorite thing in the nerdosphere, and there's just so much to relate to, politically, personally, and all that. So.
Yeah, and you got your posting at the School for Gifted Youngsters, and you got tenure, so now you're essentially unfireable. So that's a good thing.
It always seems threatened, though. I don't know why. It could be some of my actions, but I do have that tenor.
If I am the resident Gambit of the show, which I am, then Jeff Budd would be the resident Cyclops, which he is. Jeff, how did you get into X-Men?
You introduced me as a Cyclops fan. I got into X-Men through Wolverine.
Making me egg on my face.
Wolverine, a character that I would later learn to hate, and then would later learn to begrudgingly respect. But he was one of my exactly. He was one of my favorite superheroes when I was very young, because I had some of the Secret Wars collection from like the late 80s, early 90s. And so I had all of the villains. I had Spider-Man, I had Captain America, Iron Man, and I had Wolverine. And I liked Wolverine, and my dad is a big comic book fan and a major X-Men fan especially. So he would tell me about the character and stuff like that. And then I had the Tiger game, the Tiger handheld. And it was Wolverine.
Yeah, those old games, yeah.
Nice.
And it was Wolverine versus Magneto. So once again, I was playing Wolverine. I had like the Wolverine Nintendo game. It's so funny. Cyclops, before I was a fan, seeing a picture of the entire X-Men team, because I knew Wolverine before I knew the X-Men. I was like, oh, Wolverine. And I was like, and he's in the front. I was like, oh, this is the team that he's the leader of. And my dad was like, no, that guy's the leader of the X-Men. And he pointed at Cyclops on the right. And I was just like, who's that? And I had no idea how rich that character was, how much I would relate to that character, how much I would just fall in love with that character years down the road. But yeah, at the time, Wolverine was my guy. And then like Davis, I also had Pride of the X-Men VHS. I think I still have the copy at my parents' house as well. I used to watch the hell out of that. Australian Wolverine. My favorite part, though, by far, is definitely them doing like the one-offs against each other at the end, the heroes matching up against the enemies. And then it's only Nightcrawler left and the Blob is there. And it's like, nothing moves the Blob. And it's like, and I wouldn't dream of trying. Auf Wiedersehen. And he bows, teleports right behind him. Blob just scratches it. Where'd he go? And Nightcrawler just walks right past him to go face Magneto and save Kitty, who had gotten kidnapped earlier in the episode. That was so great. That part will always stand out to me. And I like it because that series is what syncs up with the arcade game that I think we were all obsessed with in the early 90s. It's the exact same roster. I mean, I don't give two shits about Dazzler, but I do. She was one of my favorite characters in that game. I played her all the time. I played Cyclops, I played Dazzler, I played Colossus, and then Storm was like kind of like my backup because I did like the tornado attack.
One thing about Pride of the X-Men is, you mentioned Nightcrawler specifically. We're going to talk a lot tonight about X-Men, the animated series. But if there was an improvement with Pride of the X-Men, is the fact that you had Nightcrawler and Colossus, involved from the jump, which if there is any sort of detraction is that they weren't in the animated series enough. But Marco, how did you first get into the X-Men as a DC guy?
I know, resident DC guy. I know. Comics growing up, I always got the DC books. My brother got the Marvel. PU wasn't interested. However, I had a very similar, story to Davis, where growing up I didn't have cable. I only grew up with 3 channels of television, but one of them was Fox. So 92 X-Men, the animated series, amongst many other great programming on that network at the time, was it. That gave me so much thrill. Seeing something that actually looked like a moving comic book at the time was fantastic. It was unlike many other cartoons out. And that really introduced me to the characters. And then later on, just like yourself, James, I was a card collector, and the X-Men 95 Fleer Ultra set is, I mean, just outstanding. It's what got me into card collecting in the first place. I remember going down to Rich's ice cream shop, or sorry, it was Rocky Coast ice cream shop, and buying cards there because they sold them at the ice cream shop in our hometown, and then going to Rich's Comics to try to pick up other packs later. And I still have this set, and it's kind of the golden standard when it comes to comic cards, which are, I mean, they still make some apparently, but I don't know why. But in the 90s, comic cards were amazing. And this set, with how they divided the teams into the blue versus gold, the spring break collection of everyone wearing their skivvies, to all the different bonus cards and chase cards. I mean, this was quintessential chase card kingdom, where they had the suspended animation cells, where it's the double-sided see-through card of characters from the animated series, including like Jubilee and Morph and all the ones that I was really familiar with. So from there, I just really always liked the X-Men property. In fact, it was really one of the only Marvel books I started buying when I started reading comics again as a grown man. And Bendis's run, I read his work for I think like 5 years on it, all the way through Battle of the Atom and so forth, into some of Cullen Bunn's run. Cullen Bunn's work on Magneto and his standalone series there a few years back was phenomenal. It's just one of the properties from Marvel that I just have lots of respect for and thoroughly enjoy. So excited for the extravaganza here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you mentioned the cards, those the spring break ones. I always remember very fondly those suspended animations, because they, if I'm not mistaken, they did suspended animations for the Spider-Man the animated series as well. So you had like chase cards for, like lifted from the TV show onto those cards, which was very cool. And it just it synced up really nicely. Those Marvel Masterpiece, among other sets, were coming out just as the show would then premiere. So that is definitely how I got, so deep into the X-Men. And then, the comics would follow later on. At its heart, obviously, they are characters that originated in a comic book. So I want to talk about some of the major things from the comics that we liked, maybe some things that we didn't like, different eras and rosters, which we've alluded to. But, I guess for me, what stands out is the real OG and true First Class, with Cyclops, Beast before the hair, Jean Grey, Iceman, Angel. I love that First Class, and I think it's a shame that we've never really gotten that on the big screen. But I guess I'll kick it over to you, Jeff. What is your take on the original First Class? Does that stand out to you, or is it just a footnote?
No, it's more than a footnote. It's hard. I kind of have mixed emotions about the First Class. One, because they're the First Class, that they're always going to have a special place in just X-Men history and lore. I really think they came into their own when they were the original X Factor. So it was all of them as adults. They weren't with Xavier anymore. I think they had better costumes as opposed to like the school uniform type costumes. And then the relationships were more complex. Obviously, Cyclops and Jean had past relationships. Then when they thought she had died, she had a regular romantic relationship with Angel for a while. Iceman and Beast always had their own personal things that were going on. The fact that they had come apart and then had joined up again as a team. They first faced Apocalypse as X-Factor, which is one of my favorite storylines. I loved reading that. Not only did it show off some of Cyclops' acrobatic prowess and amazing leadership, but it also showed Caliban betray them, which was like the best. It was one of those things that, like, when I read it as a kid, which is obviously long after it had been published, it's like I was like yelling at the page. I could not believe what Caliban had done, because the Four Horsemen had captured the entire X Factor, with the exception of Warren Worthington III, who was still in the hospital, or was he? He was the fourth horseman, Death, who had betrayed them. So they just got betrayed by one of their best and oldest friends. And then Caliban, who listened to Apocalypse's entire speech, he comes sneaking over and he's like, Scott Summers, and Cyclops is like, Caliban, we forgot about you. And he goes, it's like, because the battle and the struggle, they just forgot about Caliban because he doesn't have that kind of power. And he's like, Apocalypse is so strong and powerful. What can we do? And Cyclops is like, just release me and don't worry, everything will be fine. and he just walks past Cyclops and goes over to Apocalypse and bows down before him and asks if he will also be given power that was given to Warren if he acquiesces to Apocalypse, if he pledges fealty. And he does become one of the Four Horsemen later on down the line. And then, of course, the battle turns and Warren, saves the day at the end, and Warren, Jean, and Cyclops fight them off while Iceman and Hank do their thing too. But oh man, I love that part. Another comic book, I forgot to mention this with the introductions. It's a Captain America comic book. It's one of the first comic books I ever read. It's when Magneto confronts Red Skull.
Mm-hmm.
And it was to see if Red Skull was the original Red Skull from World War II. And Magneto just wanted to find out if he was one of the people that was obviously a part of the Nazi army, and to make him answer for his crimes as far as what had happened with the Holocaust, since Magneto is a Holocaust survivor. And then Red Skull kind of just, not taking him seriously, blowing smoke in his face and going, it's like, it's a new body, but it's the same Red Skull. And then Magneto just tearing up the entire headquarters. Red Skull continuing to try to escape. And then at the end, he's captured. Magneto doesn't kill him, though. He locks him like in this basement and gives him just enough water or whatever so that he'll barely survive. He basically was forcing him to go through what he had experienced as a child. It was a really cool issue. It was incredibly heavy for like a...
Yeah.
I think I was like 5 or 6 when I read that. But I loved it. I thought it was really cool. And it was probably the first time I ever saw Magneto in a different light, because obviously, I just knew him as a villain before that, and then I would look at him as a villain again after. But that was an interesting take that I enjoyed getting to know. And then, I don't... Oh, go ahead.
I think for a lot of us, the Giant Size X-Men is sort of the quintessential roster to a lot of us, our favorite rosters. It at least in the reintroduction, a revitalization of the X-Men property in the comics. I mean, that is that was a big turning point, I feel, for them as well.
I mean, I think it's what saved the comic, because like we were talking about, X-Men was sort of in limbo before that. They were just like reprinting old stories. The original X-Men, as much as we like them, they never really caught on the way that, maybe they did with us. I like the 90s roster, though, where it's like everybody from the original team. You also still have Nightcrawler, Colossus, Wolverine, Storm. You have Psylocke. I mean, like the Jim Lee cover and everything like that with the new X-Men 1. And it's like, growing up as a
Gambit.
90s kid, it's like, that's my team. Well, yeah, Gambit, Rogue. I mean, that's 90s. That's 90s X-Men, and 90s X-Men is what I love. And then after that, I really feel it dropped off, but oh well.
Yeah, I think it's important to note before we start kicking it around in terms of what I really want to say about the X-Men in terms of they are, in my estimation, the greatest faction or team in comic book history. I think that they are, at the very top, even above the Justice League or the Avengers, because of some of their quintessential stories. Their roster, albeit big, just like a lot of them, it makes a lot more sense. So almost a negative of some of the other ones where it's like, oh, everybody's an Avenger. In this confines, like, you have to be a mutant to be part of the X-Men, essentially, and what they stand for, what Professor Xavier stands for, and Stan Lee, God rest his soul, talking about how the standoff between he and Magneto was, he very much so painted Charles Xavier as this Martin Luther King-esque figure, as opposed to an even more extreme Malcolm X type figure for Magneto. And just that they, I think, are so applicable even today, with everything going on in our world in terms of the fight for mutant kind and just their equal rights and not to be discriminated against. It's very powerful stuff, and I think that with all those factors, they really do stand above any other superhero team. And I love the Fantastic Four and all that. I think the X-Men truly are the greatest.
I agree with you, and I don't want to argue with what Stan Lee said that much, but I really don't like the comparisons of Magneto and Malcolm X. Magneto is a terrorist. And
yes.
Yeah, and you can like him and you can relate to him in certain ways, and that's fine. And I know that they've done a lot of whitewashing with his personality and character over the decades. But if anybody's Malcolm X, it's Cable. And that's exactly what I thought the 90s were. Because Cable came back in time, saw that Charles Xavier's dream and his way of approaching it was not going to work. He saw what the future was. Charles failed, the X-Men failed. So he takes the New Mutants, he militarizes them, and makes them the X-Force. That's your militant but benevolent mutant. And I really feel that's the comparison that people should make. Magneto is a bad person.
Yeah,
and
correct.
And he... I like Magneto so much because... his background and what he became. He became the next generation of Nazi. He suffered the Holocaust, learned nothing from it other than all of the bad lessons, the hatred, the prejudice, the fear. And then he turned around and became exactly that. And you can talk about how it's like Magneto's like defensive and it's to make sure that his people survive. I don't know. Have you ever read like any of the rhetoric from hate groups? It's about racial survival and making sure that their children have like a world to live in. Magneto's spewing the same hate speech as any of them. So yeah, I feel it's a bad rap for Malcolm X to be lumped in with Magneto.
I completely agree with you, which is why I tried to preface it with a much more extreme version of that. And maybe that
I think
was
Stanley's the king of retcons, because if he's saying that he wrote Magneto as an anti-hero from the beginning, he's full of shit. All right? I mean, those original Magneto stories, he used to just bully and torture Toad and Mastermind in the original Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. And Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch, who were, obviously misguided youth that, had been persecuted and obviously weren't going to become X-Men, but they weren't evil. They were like, let's get the hell out of here. A guy who they didn't know was their father yet. It's like, this guy is awful. We can't follow him. No, Magneto is not inspirational, and he is not a good person. And I mean, we'll get more into it, but yeah.
No, Magneto, one of the great comic book villains, and we stress villain, which is why I'm glad you made that distinction. And I think the Cable comparison for Malcolm X is much more apropos. And I do think what I was going to say, as opposed to Stanley being full of shit, but was looking maybe more at a current state of things and with rose-colored glasses on what Magneto maybe had become, as opposed to, again, what he was writing him as at the very beginning. Yeah, because he's a mutant terrorist. It is different. But Davis, how about you? What is some of your favorite, I guess, eras of the X-Men?
Well, Jeff hit on a good point with the original. They didn't catch on because they were so two-dimensional. There just wasn't a whole lot to them. And when Claremont came on with Giant later on, it was just more melodramatic stuff happening. It's just so much more interesting. So for me, my favorite roster will always be the Giant X-Men. But after that, the Blue Team from the 90s, that was always one of the tops. And then even the New Mutants, the Demon Bear saga, like that storyline, if you haven't read it, read it. It's really good. And it just kind of hits on more of the later teen years of being a mutant really well. And if you have a chance, read that one.
Marco, let's hear from a resident, broad comic expert, Mark Truex. Maybe your favorite roster, like, I'm glad Jeff mentioned the 90s one, because Gambit is my favorite X-Man, and he really did own the 90s along with Wolverine in terms of the X properties in a lot of ways. Yeah, dripping cool for days. But Mark, what about you? What are your favorite rosters of the X-Men?
My reading of it is a lot more recent. As I said, I started reading the X-Men actual comics as they released starting in like 2011. And I really dug, this is all basically post-Schism, where Schism was where Wolverine and Cyclops basically warred for control of the X-Men, ultimately breaking up the group, where Wolverine became essentially the new Professor X running the Xavier school, and Cyclops went off as more of like a mutant revolutionary path.
More like
Magneto.
So
Magneto
stupid.
in tow. And I really enjoyed it because I liked reading both books, that they were just wildly different takes on each other. Wolverine having to work with all these kids and turn them into, headstrong heroes, as well as Cyclops kind of breaking bad. And it was very enthralling for me all the way through the AVX, debacles, the Phoenix 5, getting the Phoenix Force back in a very new fun take. I thoroughly enjoyed the divergence.
Jeff, as the Cyclops fan, that you are, how do you feel about the sort of more modern take on Psych?
Well, I mean, I think Mark kind of explained it with his background, why he could appreciate it. He was going into it without, the lore and the history of those characters. And so it's like, all right, if it's an interesting story to him, then yeah, it's going to be good. As somebody who, I've gone through all the stories with Cyclops, and I've seen the suffering, I've seen the growth, I've seen his connections to different characters. I think it's not disgusting, but I do think it's a disservice to the character to do something like that with Cyclops. something that you and I had talked about, and I think it's really important to bring up, is Charles Xavier and Magneto. You know, they were friends, and then obviously they fractured because of their different ideologies and the direction that they wanted to go with their dreams. One thing where I feel that Charles has always been superior in Magneto is that he's had a pupil like Cyclops, where Cyclops is a true believer in the inspirational message that Xavier has. He's on more than one occasion carried on that dream without Xavier having to be there to hold his hand. And it's like, that's the dream. That's what Xavier is hoping for, is that the next generation picks up where he leaves off and that they'll continue to move in that direction. What has Magneto ever inspired? He's inspired nobody. He's been betrayed countless times. I think of Fabian Cortez, obviously, in the 90s, who at one point had kidnapped and was trying to murder Magneto's grandchild in Genosha to try to create like another genocide. He was hoping to spark a big civil war on the blood of Magneto's human grandchild. She didn't have mutant abilities. But I mean, that's just one example. There was also Exodus and, Colossus being an acolyte and then hopping off of that, and the original Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. My whole thing about Cyclops is it's just, he's gone through so much, and it's not that his character hasn't changed, but he's never betrayed like those core values. And it's like, because it's not that he was brainwashed, or it's not that Xavier hit him at a young age. It's that Cyclops also just respects those ideals and wants to see the same world that Charles Xavier wants to see. And another thing I've always said about Marvel comic books is any timeline where Charles Xavier is dead, it is a terrible world. It's like just bad things happen. If there's one life that is just vital in Marvel comic books, it's Charles Xavier. Keep the man alive. That is the only time they ever have some sort of utopia. Otherwise, it's god-awful.
The X-Men, the animated series episode, One Man's Worth, is essentially all about that.
Yeah, and I mean, and they've done it numerous times in the comic books, and I can sympathize with Marvel that it's been countless decades, and you've got to do, you want to do different things with characters, you want to put them in, different settings, you want to go in new directions, but I just feel that it's such an abrupt turn to do something like that to Cyclops, because you can't say that his life hasn't been tragic. At a young age, he was, essentially orphaned, not knowing what actually happened to his parents. He was still, though, having to be responsible, raising his younger brother. He has a power that, because of the brain damage he suffered from that plane crash, he cannot control. He's one of the world's most powerful mutants. Apocalypse listed him in the top 12, but it's a power that he can't control, so he can never even look at anybody that he cares about. He's been betrayed countless times before he even met Charles Xavier. Jack of Diamonds, who manipulated him, used his powers, made him do like evil things. He's lost Jean Grey multiple times, lost his son, raised his son in the future, lost Madeline Pryor, found Madeline Pryor again as a supervillain. How much can the man go through?
Exactly.
And still come out positively. I'm sorry, Mark. Yeah, Mark, exactly. He keeps coming out positive. He keeps coming out positive. Do you understand what I'm saying?
That's why he had
he's
to break
gone through
bad.
all of that, and he's been fine. And then it's like, oh, but one bad day. I'm sorry. It's not a Punisher Daredevil situation at this point. Cyclops is what they call resilient. All right. Yeah. And he understands that the end goal is what actually matters. And he can go through all of that other stuff.
Or maybe he just wanted to take a new
approach.
approach.
He's not as mentally weak as Magneto. And then you take Wolverine. How old is that guy? All of a sudden, he's decided to change things? All of a sudden, he's going to be the Papa Bear who's licking the pups? It's sickening to me, man. And it's like, okay, so we're going to take Wolverine, who's ultra popular, and then we're going to put him in this very likable situation. But what they're quintessentially doing is ruining everything about Wolverine that made him popular in the first place. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of old Wolverine fans are then not a fan of that Wolverine stuff. Go ahead and just abandon everybody who is a fan going into it. Yeah, it's like, if it ain't broke, please break it immediately and then make subpar comics that nobody wants to read.
Scotty Summers finally got to settle down with Emma Frost, and I'm okay with that.
See, but I don't think he belongs with someone like Emma Frost. And I don't mind him dating her for a while. And don't get me wrong, props to Scotty, because everybody loves Emma Frost. All right?
Yeah.
I wanted to have sex with Emma Frost before I knew what sex was. All right? It's like, she is a great comic book character. But, I mean, no, he belongs with, like, Jean Grey or somebody like that. And I'm thinking of some of the other girls that he dated. She's always dead, and she always comes back. It doesn't matter.
He doesn't belong with Emma.
Not indefinitely.
Emma deserves a good boy.
It's all right.
They were a cute match.
Well, I mean,
So-
they look great
two
together.
rebels living on the road, trying to make a
But
difference.
Emma's not a rebel on the road anymore. I liked what they actually did with Emma's character because
They
there was
softened
a
her heart.
redemption arc in the 90s, and I liked her working with Sean Cassidy with the what were they, Generation X. It's like that was really cool, and it's like, okay, I could see how she could make that slight turn. It was still not quite as soft and cuddly as the school that Davis works at, but you know, the Massachusetts Academy was all right.
So, Mark, you're firmly in the pro. What was it? Cyclops did nothing wrong camp.
Cyclops was right.
He's a part of the. I've been a fan of for 5 minutes, and so I think this stuff's really cool. and then those of us who have forgotten more about X-Men than Mark will ever know, we're like, you know what? I don't think that's actually the story.
Oh, fear
should go.
change. It's okay. You know, hold the line.
Oh,
Don't
no,
let
you're
other
ab-
people make stories.
You're
and new
absolutely
fans
right,
come
Mark.
in and take
X-Men
new
has been
things in.
completely stagnant for decades. They only finally changed the story. God bless these writers. They're so much
It was
better than
exciting to
everybody
see
who's
him
come
go down a
before.
different path. It was exciting to see him go down a different path and try something different and be
I
all
don't
broody.
mind.
I was
don't
okay
mind
with
the
it because
character going down a
I felt
different
his
path
pain.
as long as it's
With-
a logical
look,
path.
With every action, he wasn't running around going, "Hey, this is great! Yeah, let's destroy stuff." No, it ate him up inside, and you can see the pain on the pages of him having to do this. But he didn't know any other way. It had been too much for too long, and he had to finally try something different.
That's not Cyclops.
What I will say is we do have to move along here, but it's not as bad as this, but it is a reminder to me of when I took umbrage with what the Marvel writers did to Captain America with the Hail Hydra storyline. And look, I know that there was like their whole end plan in sight, but you can't take a character that existed for that many years and has been a literal symbol of defeating fascism and Nazism and then just decide out of the blue, and I don't care what your end storyline is, that he is a part of that group. And so that to me was a complete perversion, and those writers should be ashamed of themselves for even thinking of that, because it's a brand. It sticks, like regardless of what the end game of that storyline was, what most people will remember is like, hey, remember when Captain America was a part of Hydra? So it's not as bad as this, but taking Cyclops down the road of the more Magneto path to me is not acceptable. Like for all the reasons that Jeff laid out about that he had already been through so much. He was made of sterner stuff. His DNA in terms of his resiliency had been tested already. So yeah, I'm not a fan of that new take, and the sort of the eternal loner all of a sudden running the Xavier school is just a little wonky from where I sit. But I do want to talk about some of the other major story arcs. Days of Future Past obviously is one that comes up a lot for a reason. It was just 2 issues, but it is a really, really good story arc, and it's been well adapted in the animated series. I really like Days of Future Past. Davis, is that one of yours?
Yeah, it's definitely in my top 3. It has one of the top panels that you're going to remember, with all of the pictures behind Wolverine of deceased, alive. It's just all the mutants that are dead or alive or lost or all that. And then, unfortunately, the movie came out, but that's a later discussion. But
worth it for
yeah.
Beast.
But that was just such an interesting storyline, and just where the world could have went. And it was just fascinating to read.
Mark, are you a Days of Future Past man?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. When I was younger, I ended up getting, it was like a novelization version for like young adults of it. Young adults, maybe it was for children, but it was
Like
quite
12-year-olds
enjoyable.
probably. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, it had that on the cover was the image that was talking about all the posters with them being X'd out and Wolverine basically protecting Kitty Pryde on the front.
Kitty Pryde,
yeah. And that was really cool. That was really my foray into that. And then of course we got the movie.
Yeah.
So.
And they missed out on the very emotional and touching stuff between Kitty Pryde and Colossus, and if it's meant to be that they'll find each other or whatever the timeline essentially is. It is a classic arc for a reason. Jeff, are you what is your take on Days of Future Past?
Huge fan of the issues, because I read a bunch of these essentials, and I actually like that X-Men roster team also, because it's like giant-sized X-Men, but evolved a little bit. Kitty Pryde had joined. A couple of the other people were gone at that point. You had Colossus and Nightcrawler. I thought it was a pretty solid story. I really liked how they did it on the cartoon series. I'm always surprised with how well they were able to adapt things with such a small amount of time. And then where obviously they had different characters in the cartoon, I thought they did fine, but in the movie, I mean, I can't begrudge them for not making Kitty Pryde a focal point of the story in the movie, because the character's barely in it, or is barely in the movies before that. So it's like the audience doesn't really relate to her yet. There's really nothing there. But I mean, they still kind of missed out on a couple other key points too. Maybe just how dire things were in the future. I would have liked more of that. And then I don't know, just the movies, especially those older ones. I mean, or that's not even one of the older ones. So many of them just center around Wolverine that it just kind of gets tiresome at a certain point.
Yeah, no, I will. We'll get much more into that as well. One I wanted to mention is Mutant Genesis, which, whatever you think of, if the story was rich or whatever, it is one of the major sort of factors in why the makeup of the animated series was the way that it was. So, like, I'm thankful for Mutant Genesis for the roster that it had involved there, because it is what in many ways birthed the animated series. Another one, God Loves, Man Kills, is a really, really good X-Men arc. Inspiration for X2 in a lot of ways, in a very sort of a more modern take on mutants being persecuted minorities and stuff like that. Stryker in that is a reverend, not a government official or general or whatever he was, colonel in X2. But other story arcs, Jeff, you mentioned the Essentials. I know you always speak very highly of just if you want a window into X-Men, to pick those up.
Yeah, and then no offense to the original X-Men, those like the one set of Essentials that I could not get through was the original X-Men roster. I feel Stan Lee is very good at creating characters, but I feel every character he created, it's once it gets into the hands of another writer, that's where it really takes off. And I mean, that was the case with the X-Men. That's the case with really all of them. So, but the Uncanny X-Men Essentials, oh my God, I couldn't burn through those quick enough. I'm trying to think of some of the storylines that I did. Oh, well, I mean, we haven't really talked about the Phoenix Saga or the Dark Phoenix Saga yet. And it's like, that was also, once again, super well done in the cartoon with how quickly they had to get through it. In the comics, I love it because it's such a slow burn as far as the introduction of the Phoenix powers. Yeah, no pun intended.
Thank you.
And then, yeah, how long she had the abilities before it became necessary that it's like, this is the Phoenix entity. It entered Eugene Gray because it needs to, protect the M'Kraan crystal in this far-off galaxy. It's such a strange and, like, off-the-wall story when you think about it, especially compared to a lot of the grounded things that they do with the X-Men as far as just, racial rights and dealing with either rogue government officials or reverends and things like that, where it's like this, that they're rescuing a space princess and Cyclops' father's alive. He's a space pirate. And then what I also love is after they save the day, I mean, she remains Phoenix for a while. They don't do the Dark Phoenix thing right away, where in the cartoon, that very next episode, you see her spazzing out in the danger room and Charles Xavier's trying to communicate. It's like, why are you still here, Phoenix? Leave Jean Grey alone. Your mission is complete. It's like, ha 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 ha, but, and then also seeing Phoenix go against Magneto and the two of them, just their powers clash, because obviously Jean Grey on her own was never a match for Magneto before, and they destroyed that entire base that he had, and that's when she thought all the X-Men had died, and the X-Men thought that she had died, and that's when they go to the Savage Land and all that. It's like all of that is so rich, and I also really love the Hellfire Club.
Yeah,
and just all those characters, the lore behind that. You have to remember that Iron Man and Angel are members of the Hellfire Club, as were their fathers. And it's like, and the Hellfire Club base is like a block away from Avengers headquarters, because it's all in that same neighborhood in New York. And for the most part, the Hellfire Club's not even bad. It's just the inner circle. And so, I mean, all of that I really enjoy. Yeah, I mean, I could go on and on just about the Phoenix Saga alone. And then I was talking about it before with Fabian Cortez spazzing out on Genosha. And that was Blood Ties. And the reason I loved that so much was it was X-Men and it was the Avengers, because Quicksilver was an Avenger at the time. Or no, Quicksilver was with X-Factor, and then Crystal was with the Avengers, who was the mother of Magneto's grandchild. And so it took all these superheroes to come and rescue her, and at the same time, it was diplomatic relations. they're a bunch of Americans going to Genosha. It's like they can't be involved in the Civil War. Wasp, or not Wasp, Black Widow was testifying before the United Nations, saying how the Avengers were not going to get involved. The only one who was allowed to was U.S. Agent because he was there doing some covert ops thing. It was really sick. So all of that is really good too. I highly recommend it.
Davis, any major arcs from your schooling that we may have missed?
One of my favorites from the 90s, the Phalanx Covenant story arc. The Phalanx were just so terrifying to me because I don't know what it was when I reread those, but they get just morphing into anything. They're bioorganic, and just the way they did that with the X-Men, it just kind of set. You didn't know really what to expect, and that was really one of the storylines. I really wasn't sure how many of the X-Men would actually make it out of it because I didn't know where it was going. I didn't read any spoilers or anything, and that one seemed like everybody was actually in danger to me. Like one of the first times I actually felt like, oh, some of these guys actually might not make it. So that actually was exciting. And then Age of Apocalypse is that is just classic, and just they stopped in quotation marks. They canceled all the comics then, and then put everybody into the Age of Apocalypse, and that's pretty crazy to do, and it worked really well.
That's the one where Cyclops was raised by Mr. Sinister, was one of the aristocrats in Apocalypse's kingdom, and yet still joined forces with the X-Men despite his entire life being raised like that. Okay. Yeah, no, I'm just double checking.
He's a race trader.
Wow. Wow. No, that's circling back to that point. Okay, yeah, no, those are some classic ones. On our way out the door, before we go to another break and come back and talk about the animated series and such, if you're looking to get into Gambit in comic form, there's a few. X-Men 24 is when he goes on his first date with Rogue. Who doesn't love that? But Brood Trouble in the Big Easy. I'm a huge fan of the city of New Orleans. That's only grown, helped grow my appreciation of Gambit and everything like that. But that storyline takes place in New Orleans, and it has, it's got Bishop in it, traveling through time. That's when we learned that he is Remy LeBeau. So there's some fun stuff to unpack in that storyline with Gambit. So we're going to take another quick break. More on the Extravaganza. We're going to be getting to the animated series, so we will do that on the other side. Welcome back to the Best Damn Nerd Show, Extravaganza, and this is going to be my favorite part of the episode because we are going to be talking about X-Men, the animated series, which, as Mark alluded to earlier, came out in 1992 and was Marvel's answer to really Batman, the animated series, and I think is the closest to Batman in terms of impact on maybe a comic book mythos, certainly at least in people's entry into that mythos. So X-Men, the animated series, was a very, very big deal for me growing up, for all of us growing up, and for so many nerds out there. So I always geek out and nerd out whenever we can talk about X-Men, the animated series. It's on Disney Plus now, which that alone is a reason to get Disney Plus. But your initial sort of thoughts when you think back on when you first came into contact with X-Men, the animated series. Jeff, we'll start with you.
It's probably my favorite of the big superhero three growing up of X-Men, Spider-Man, and Batman, the animated series. I love the animation. I like the characters. I was only reading so many X-Men comic books at the time, so kind of like what you were saying, it's like that's what I knew about the X-Men was that cartoon. I definitely always saw Night of the Sentinels, part 1 and 2, all the time. Probably I've seen those 60 times. I've seen the other episodes about once or twice.
That's accurate. That is how it was aired. It was
so it's like they did not have other episodes, and then they hit you with Morlock episodes. It's like, what is this?
What a waste!
I want to watch them fight Juggernaut. What's going on here? But we've already alluded to the cartoon a few times this episode about what great adaptations they did of major storylines. They had to update it because they were using a partial 90s roster. I thought they killed it. I thought it was great. I really loved the interactions and relationships between the characters. I do also like that certain episodes, it was, time to shine. Maybe it's the entire team, but a couple of characters were who they really focused on. I thought Cyclops was represented great in that. He always kicked a lot of ass. He was a good leader. He wasn't perfect. Had a lot of great struggles with Wolverine. Didn't always make the right decision. My one complaint is that they should have talked about more who the original roster was, like they did in the Iceman episode, which I love.
Yes.
Where Warren Worthington III was a stranger to them, and I did not like that. I wish they said that he was just a former X-Man who wasn't a part of the team anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a super valid point. And while I may think that Batman the Animated Series stands at the top of the mountain in terms of the big in terms of all animated series, really for me, it's Batman, and then it's X-Men. But what X-Men has on all of them, including Batman, is the best intro in the history of maybe shows ever. The X-Men the Animated Series intro, the theme with all of the action shots and just everything, it tells you everything you need to know, and I get amped every time I hear it. It holds up, man. It is so phenomenally good. That's one you can put on your gym mix, and you can keep running because you're doing it for Mutant Kind. You're doing it for Charles. So, but Davis, how did you? Go ahead.
You hear that theme? It's goosebumps. It puts a smile on my face every time. It's just amp, man. It's just pure hype, and. You know, when I think back on it, I think back on not only what Jeff was mentioning, but just how well they did, like the Phoenix Saga. That spanned, I think, 6 or 8 episodes, and they just took it for what it was, and they ran with it.
Yeah.
And they didn't hold anything back. And not only did they not just pander to trying to be a kid show, it was had adult themes, and it didn't talk down to you, is what I'm trying to say here. I didn't feel like a kid show all the time, especially when you rewatch it, and I think that's why it still holds up. But if I'm going back and I think back on, you know, of course, Night of the Sentinels is always up there, but there's when my favorite character is Nightcrawler, and he did get the shaft in this series because he did not get that much time. But I think back on the Nightcrawler episode with Wolverine going into the church, and he had a lot of, I guess, psychological exploration in that episode. And for Nightcrawler to be my favorite episode, you guys have always kind of laughed at because he's religious, and that is.
And you're godless.
That's not your wheelhouse. Yeah, no, you guys are not bedfellows, but it worked.
But maybe I'm like reaching out to him because maybe I want to see more.
You're Wolverine. You're Wolverine, and I'm
on a spiritual quest.
You're Wolverine, and I'm Nightcrawler to you, Davis. I'm just trying to get you into the good word, my friend. No, but you're right, because it was exploring not just religion, but the nuances of religion. We're exploring not just Nightcrawler, who's a person of faith, who's persecuted, who looks like a devil, but Wolverine's lack of religion. Probably, like, at that time, unheard of for a children's show to be going into those kinds of things. And, you know, in the original run of the Best Damn Nerd Show, I will admit, I sold this series short in terms of its sort of nuance on that front. And going back and rewatching, it holds up so well. And it really, to Davis's point, it doesn't really talk down to you. You go through some things and you learn some things. It's a really great series. But Mark, talk about your introduction to X-Men, the animated series, if you will.
Yuriko. Just so great. Love the series, of course. That's why we're here. The animation, again, it was just like an actual comic book was live action, or in animation. It looked phenomenal. The ladies looked really phenomenal in it.
Rogue,
yeah. Come on.
That's how I knew I was
Never
straight.
Seen a little flight jacket look so great. And what I really dug was, like, anytime we got a lot of, like, the D-list mutant villains, like you get Avalanche and Pyro in the mix. I really like that.
Davis
level.
and Tim.
Yeah, no doubt.
Dude, that is Avalanche and Pyro. That is Davis and Tim's relationship.
Sadly accurate.
They were so good. But I just like the extreme depth into, you know, the lore that they get into. Like, I mean, even going to, like, the Savage Lands, going out there for Genosha and stuff like that, was wild.
Jeff, I know you're big on the Savage Lands episode, as am I. But why the Savage? Is it because of Kazar, or what's the deal?
Well, I mean, you know, I'm
Is
also
it
like the resident
Amphibious?
Tarzan fan, so yeah, I love Kazar, but no, what I love about Savage Land is what a slow burn it was, because it's not like a lot of children's shows. It was mostly episodic, and it's like, you would get your beginning, middle, and end, and the story was over. Then you move on to the next episode next week. But with Charles and Magneto, it was the last like 5 minutes of every episode for a very long time. Just this slow burn of them not having powers, but Xavier being able to walk again, and them just surviving in the jungle together. And also the two of them being on the same side, which I always appreciate. I mean, I was throwing Magneto under the bus a little bit as far as some of my attitudes towards him. But at the end of the day, the two of them still are best. Well, he is. He believes in racial superiority and wants to commit genocide against another group. I mean, we're not splitting hairs here, Magneto. You're a Nazi. But it was cool to see the two of them unified. And then, typical Magneto fashion, turns out the Savage Land was a big just F you. The failed experiment of Magneto. It's like, oh yeah, I was creating all this stuff and it didn't quite work out. So I just sort of flushed it down the toilet. Thought it would all, just stay here in Antarctica and not be bothered by anybody. That's why I loved how much they all hated Magneto over there. And then, of course, Kazar was amazing.
Even just like you mentioned, I completely concur with the fact that it's rare to have a show like that. Really any show that can have your A and your B plot, and then just this sort of minor through line that's building to something completely different. And even their first introduction, when I believe it was Morph that was duping all of them into all of the X-Men into going certain places, and so Xavier left the X-Mansion, and Magneto met up there, and they both were duped, and then ended up in the Savage Land, and that's really how it all started. Those episodes were very good. I always liked Sauron as a character and a villain. I thought he was always really cool. Love dinosaurs, so what's not to like? What's not to like about him? So, but
I will say though, a sore one that I did not enjoy: Long Shot and Mojo Vision. Anytime those were on, I couldn't do it.
I will like
Mojo.
No.
I have grown in my appreciation for Mojo as an adult. But at the time, Mark, I was right there with you. I was like, this Mojo is disgusting to look at. And so it's another reason, like, those Morlock episodes, no thank you. They're gross. And I never was into that kind of humor or visualization. So, like, when Ren and Stimpy got very gross, I was like, count me out. So, yeah, Mojo is just this disgusting-looking vile TV producer who I've met many now over my career, and it's the accuracy now. The accuracy now I can appreciate. So, but those are not the worst episodes to me. The worst episodes are anything involving the Morlocks. So, good
Morlock episodes, and like Archon when he was trying to get Storm to marry him. It was like towards the end of the series, and it was like it was very soap opera-ish without like any action. And Archon just kind of sucks anyway. It's like, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
I mean, what am I watching?
If I got too much emphasis on Jubilee in an episode, I cannot stand that girl.
No, Jubilee was, this version of this series. She was this series' Kitty Pryde. And I appreciate.
Well, she was her generation's Kitty Pryde.
Yeah,
too, yeah.
I appreciated Jubilee for that fact in the show. She was that sort of the youthful in to this group. So I never got the hate really on Jubilee. Was she ever my favorite? No, but I understand her presence there in X-Men the Animated Series. She wasn't bad.
She was. And they should have just had Kitty Pryde. So.
Well, you're not wrong
They
necessarily.
also had to reflect what was going on in the 90s, so I sort of get that. And she was the 90s Kitty Pryde because Shadowcat had to grow up. So, I mean, they had to do something with her.
Yeah, I think if they had it to do over again, if they were to sort of maybe pick and choose and make different calls, I think Kitty Pryde would have been in that role if it was going more on just a sort of a macro level of all of the X-Men that they could put in there. But, man, in terms...
Jubilee was a big deal in the 90s, though, too. I mean, she was like the big selling point of Generation X.
I mean more if you could do it now, and maybe like knowing that they're going to be able to do, Days of Future Past And so maybe
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
so maybe we should just have Kitty Pryde involve Colossus from the start, have Nightcrawler in more episodes, because I do agree with David. You know, as I talked about earlier, one of the shortcomings is that we don't get enough of those characters. When they are there, they're great, and they did a great job with them, but I just wanted more of those characters. Iceman as well. One of you know, if we want to talk about greatest episodes, I really do feel like, and we've joked about it, how many times did we see Night of the Sentinels 1 and 2? But those two episodes, it's playing the hits. Those are great episodes. You get X-Men. Morph gets killed, or so we think. They straight up just gank a character of the X-Men. Beast gets captured.
Wolverine, look out!
Yeah, exactly. I was rewatching in preparation for this episode again, and I admitted this to Jeff already, but I'm watching this and I'm starting to get borderline sort of emotional as it's transported me back to my childhood, to where like the hair on my arms is standing up as I hear Wolverine yell, "It's adamantium tasting time, boys," and going at the Sentinels, because it's like, I'm upset about Morph. I'm upset for Wolverine. It's those two episodes really are fantastic. What a great, you know, double premiere for that show, to just show, you know, the whole audience what it was going to be all about. I love those episodes.
Is this your Beast, James? You mentioned Beast getting captured. Is that how? Because I know you love him.
Yeah.
But is that one Kelsey Grammer? Do you want it? Did you want something else?
I don't understand the question exactly.
Wait, is this your ideal version of Beast?
Yes, and I think that's why Kelsey Grammer was able to nail the role so well, because he was sort of Fraser Crane in blue makeup, and you know, he was doing the literary quotes and stuff like that. And yeah, Beast in this series, I've always loved Beast, and you know, it sucked in one aspect because he was captured for a portion, you know, of the show. And you know, and especially, you know, if I missed an episode, or you know, they were doing a rerun where he was still captured again, it's like, damn it, like when are we gonna get some more Hank McCoy up in this? And that this show
Handling this.
Yeah, he definitely was. This show is what, you know, made me fall in love with Gambit, though. To me, Gambit is my favorite character, you know, in X-Men, but it's because of this show. He to me is the coolest part of the show. I love him and Rogue. Rogue is another favorite because of this show. You know, and just, I think all of these characters, their most idealized versions, in my opinion, exist in X-Men the Animated Series. Jeff talked about
you just identify
Cyclops.
with Gambit, just constantly pursuing women getting shut down.
Hey, Rogue's into it. They just literally can't. But yes, she's into it though.
Never let up.
To me, no. Well, as Gambit said in the show, he never goes where he's not invited. So that's fine. But
come on, mon cher.
You know, Jeff was talking about how Cyclops, you know, was well portrayed, you know, in this series. You know, I think they struck the right balance with him. He really is the Leonardo, you know, comparing him to the Ninja Turtles. He's the Leonardo of the X-Men. He got to be badass in this, yet you still get that classic friction between him and Wolverine. So to me, really throughout, from top to bottom, in their idealized versions, they exist in the animated series. Storm was phenomenal in this series, but I want to talk about more of the individual episodes, because we got to talk about Externally Yours with the Tithe. That is one of the Gambit-centric episodes, and you know, they go back to the Bayou. It's fantastic. It's such an off-the-wall throwaway sort of villain, but that's what was so great about this show, is that they could explore these pathways, and they did it really well. Jeff, are you an Externally Yours guy?
Your tithe is true. Yeah, I love that episode. I mean, Gambit was probably my second favorite character on the cartoon. It was my introduction to the character. I liked him a lot. I also liked Rogue a lot. It may have been my third favorite character. So it's like, yeah, that story was awesome. And yeah, what was it? The Thieves Guild and the
Assassins.
Or was it the Assassins? Or were they both guilds? I forget.
Yeah,
but yeah, that was all
Thieves
great.
Guild and the Assassins.
Belladonna. Yeah. I mean, all of that was great.
Yeah, that was a really good one. And yeah, it was the sort of the only time we saw Belladonna, but you know, I'd read more about her in the comics. But yeah, Externally Yours is another favorite. I'll kick it over to you though, Davis. Do you have some favorite episodes you want to talk about?
I I do love Wolverine's trip up to Canada and his interaction with Alpha Flight. Just seeing Puck and Sasquatch and Vindicator.
Yeah.
I actually really enjoyed that. I really liked that episode a lot. And then also, I think it was Time Fugitives with Cable and Bishop. That whole story arc. I thought they just nailed these characters, like you said, top to bottom. Cable, Bishop, Apocalypse was pretty good, but those two episodes definitely stand out for me as well.
Jeff, how about you?
Some things that we hadn't talked about. Yeah, anything that had to do with Apocalypse or Mr. Sinister, I absolutely loved on this show. I thought it was great. I mentioned the Iceman episode. He's in only one episode. I love the character design. I thought they did a great job there. I liked his personality. They even referenced that he liked Polaris and that she dropped his ass for Havoc, and they introduced X Factor. That would be my other complaint, is just that Havoc and Cyclops were strangers, which was really weird. And they didn't understand why their powers didn't affect each other, which only happens when the mutants are related. I thought that was sort of bizarre. But other than that, I thought that episode is just top-notch. Also, when Magneto helped them fight Master Mold, I thought that was a really sick episode, too. I hate Sentinels, just because of what that means for our world, and I hated Master Mold the most. So it was great when they were going after him with Magneto. I thought all of that was good. And then, yeah, anything with Bishop I thought was just dynamite. Bishop more than Cable. I really liked Bishop on the series.
I'm glad you brought up a couple things I want to touch on. The Sentinels and your dislike of them. It is a great usage of them in this show because it gave you an imposing, intimidating, scary villain that you could also just wreck. You can kill them, blow them up with reckless abandon and show that. And it's, they're robots. So, the parents won't necessarily complain. You can't really do that. Although when Cyclops blasts Mr. Sinister and half of his torso is missing, it's a little dark. But, you mentioned Apocalypse, and they really did Apocalypse right, too. Oscar Isaac, take note, and all those producers that made that horrible film. This Apocalypse is Apocalypse. Some of the quotes, some of his are the very best. I can hear, I am as far beyond mutants as they are beyond you. It's so good. They really did him well. Mark, do you have some favorite episodes that we haven't touched on yet?
The one where they introduce Sabretooth and you finally get like a peek at that and his rivalry with Wolverine. Love that. I had the giant Sabretooth action figure growing up, like the 12-incher. Yeah. And just his whole character design at that point. Headstock and all. Come on. It's perfect 90s. Absolutely.
Yeah, Mark, can you explain the head sock to me? Because that is something that I've never looked into, but you strike me as maybe you know more about. I don't understand the head sock.
Like why,
90s, dude?
No, I don't know why the head sock came about, but it's definitely defining of the of the era. And just look at this series alone. In the X-Men main roster, what you got? Cyclops, you got Jean Grey, and you got Gambit all rocking the sock. Like.
Yeah, it's just I always wondered like what the deal was with that. Can I just purchase one? Are those available in stores? I don't understand the point. A couple episodes that we need to touch on. Beauty and the Beast. This is probably Beast's greatest episode in the series, and maybe the greatest statement that is sort of applicable to what the X-Men stand for, which is, against prejudice and discrimination. It's the episode where Beast is working to cure that beautiful blind woman who also is romantically attracted to him, even without having seen him being this blue furry mutant. And, her father wants him nowhere near his daughter, even though he can cure her and has developed this cure. He's such a racist towards mutant kind. He's the blind one in the episode. And, as it goes along, they have, the Friends of Humanity kidnapper and all that stuff. But at the very end of the episode, the father has had his eyes open and shakes Beast's hand as a friend and as a hero to all people, human and mutant kind. It's a very powerful episode, and that is definitely one of my favorites. And, that's just really speaks to Davis, your point again about what this show was able to do for children.
Yeah, it wasn't just in the shows, in the comics, and that's just a constant story arc, underlying tones in every almost every story they have, they're always fighting against something like this, and they're just battling all these negative vibes towards them and thoughts, and also dealing with everything else. It's mind blowing how well that resonates throughout each of the teams that they've brought along, not just in the cartoon but in the comics as well.
Yeah, very well said. Days of Future Past, as we talked about a couple times, they did it. Part 2, though, we get two of the most iconic, certainly for us, that oft quoted parts of X-Men the Animated Series. We get Professor Xavier saying that his watch has stopped and that it's been magnetized. Yes, one of the top quotes of the whole series, but also, at least for Jeff and I, we get Gambit saying, "Surprised to see me? I know I am."
I am.
So they did that really well. I love that. Were you like the adaptation in the cartoon, Jeff?
Oh yeah. No, I thought they did a great job. Anytime they adapted a storyline like that, I mean, as a kid, I just enjoyed it. But then, like, as I got older and actually read, like, the comic books versions of it, it's like, you know, I'm just sort of impressed with how they were able to condense it, how they were able to change it as far as different characters that were not available and who they had to kind of plug in instead. I thought they always did just a stellar job. So, yeah, I loved it.
And finally, well, there's a couple more. A Rogue's Tale, which is why I can never look at Captain Marvel or Miss Marvel in the MCU. Why I always look at Miss Marvel, Captain Marvel, and look, I know what she's done since then and before then and everything, but to me, I look at her and it's like, oh yeah, you're why Rogue can fly and stuff. That's your importance. But the fact that they explored that in this show is great. And that was another really fun episode. I really enjoyed that one. And the fact that they had this mental battle where Jean Grey had to help Rogue, conquer, what was left of Miss Marvel in there and her own demons and everything like that. It was just very cool stuff that they were able to do in this show. We get Shadow King, which, is sort of a more difficult, access point for maybe some fans, but I thought they did him well. I can hear Storm right now just going, Mizhnari. Weapon X, Lies, and Videotape, and Repo Man, those are sort of the better done X-Men Origins Wolverine stories. And so go back and watch those if you're a fan of the Wolverine character. Those are just fantastic. But I could go on all night about X-Men the Animated Series. It's on Disney Plus. Do yourself a favor. If you got time to binge watch a series and you haven't watched that in a while or have never watched it somehow and you're listening to this show, go back and watch it. It is very much so well worth it. But now we have to talk about the movies, the good, the bad, and the ugly of it all. And I really do believe that all are represented of the good, bad, and ugly in X-Men's sordid film history.
Oh,
overall thoughts on X-Men on film, Jeff?
I don't know how much good is represented. I mean, like, even what is a good X-Men movie is not like that great. The adaptation was never really done that well. There was always some solid casting. There was always what appeared to be good intentions. They continued to sucker me by making me think that maybe this time they had gotten things right, and they never did. They never did. I mean,
even when they tried the same storyline multiple times.
Yeah, I know. How do you make the mistake twice? And even worse, how do you screw it up more? Because X3 was terrible, or was it? And it's like, props to the first one coming out in 2000. It was one of those first few superhero movies that really paved the way as far as what this century was going to look like with superhero movies. It definitely is representative of its time, though, as far as the cheap jokes about what the comic book costumes look like and is some of how the characters were represented and everything. But it was a different time. It was 2000. It was before Hollywood was fully embracing that stuff. I mean, there's still pushback, so I get it.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, it was before we could even conceptualize what it would look like if they were wearing their actual suits. I remember before Captain America came out, and I know they had done it before, but this was a very different time. I was like, are they going to change the suit? But no, they just embraced it. Mark, your initial thoughts on the X-Men film franchises as a whole?
So I just remember growing up absolutely loving the original film. The first one that came out was just wildly different. The black suits was kind of cool and modern. I know it's not, the tide says, as you guys said, the digs there, but the use of Rogue and setting up this relationship with her and Wolverine was cool. Just seeing all these different powers on film. Magneto was awesome in that, right? And everything that followed since was kind of hit or miss. I don't remember a whole lot of it. Like, what always stands out is the first one, and then X-Men First Class. I really dug First Class. I'm gonna say it.
I think that's
the rest
probably
of the films that followed. But
First Class might be their best movie. I mean,
First
as far as
Class
I'm concerned,
was
yeah. Oh, or like,
excellent.
if I'm not including Deadpool or Logan.
Davis?
Yeah, if you're not including those ones.
Those are kind of fringe, though, a little bit. I mean, Deadpool almost exists in its own world, and Logan is, I mean, it's its own thing.
Yeah, you got Patrick Stewart as Xavier.
I mean, and it's definitely linked to those, but I don't know. It's still kind of its own thing. Sorry,
but
Chris,
I do think you have to add those into this franchise, though, because if you don't, it's bleak, man. It's bleak. And that's all it is. And you go back and disappointing is just the word that just kind of sums it up, because they have so much good casting in these movies that really just nail it and just falls flat the rest of the way. And it's so sad because I don't know what happened with the casting director, but they just nailed like 75% of the actors, and then the other 25 just ruin it, along with the plot, the storyline. There's so many writing stuff going on that's so many problems. But it's just they were so close with the casting, but they were just so far off with the storylines that it just really hurt all the movies.
You mentioned the casting a couple times, and yes, there were some really good castings. Kelsey Grammer is Beast, most notably among them, of course. But we need to stop with this myth that's out there because of First Class that James McAvoy is this great Charles Xavier. Nothing against the actor personally, but what he was given, the portrayal of Charles Xavier, is absolutely atrocious. I don't need frat boy Charles Xavier. I needed the man that was going to lead, mutant kind and humankind together. And we never got that. Not in First Class, not in Future Past, not in Apocalypse, not in Dark Phoenix. In Dark Phoenix, the first time he runs into any trouble, when, spoiler alert, if you're listening to this show, when Raven Mystique dies, who had no business being in the X-Men or that important, certainly in the X-Men, first thing he does is drinks himself under the table. It's ridiculous. The portrayal of McAvoy Xavier to me is one of the true lowlights of the whole film franchise to me. We never got true Charles Xavier from him. It is just crap. But Patrick Stewart as Charles Xavier, Sir Ian McKellen as Magneto, top tier. Really well done, despite the shortcomings that those movies have. They did fantastic in the role. Would you agree, Jeffrey?
No, I absolutely agree with their portrayals. I think the problem with the first trilogy, though, is that they could not get away from Magneto, and he continued to have to be this major focal point in all of the films. And I mean, it just made it where it was like sort of repetitive. And even though there were other things thrown into it, it still seemed to be the same story over and over.
And that bled into the next series too.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a shame because, I mean, they do have a rich, library of villains that they could have. And I mean, how many storylines have we talked about now as far as different things that they could do? And they just kind of opted not to do that. And with movies, you only have a very small window and you only have a few opportunities. So you really got to kind of, hit as many things as you can. And then it's kind of sad because now they decided to do, like Days of Future Past and Apocalypse. And, they wanted to give Dark Phoenix another run with these newer movies. And I mean, it was too little too late, and it was incredibly subpar and disappointing. Like this latest movie, I don't think there's a single part of it that I like. But even with like the Apocalypse film, it's like there's like a couple of things that I could say I liked this or I liked that. But yeah, I don't know. It continued to distill. It's like it was continuously watered down, and that's why I think like the first X-Men movie is all right, and First Class is all right, and yeah, Deadpool is top shelf, and Logan is great, and even the Wolverine.
Yeah, let me ask you.
That was good.
let me ask you, Jeff, specifically, because I really enjoy X2. And I want to know why you don't. Is it just because it's so Wolverine centric that or is it you're already frustrated with how they're treating Cyclops, which again is not forgivable in the original run, especially considering the first one, it looks like at least he'll be on somewhat equal footing with Wolverine. But what is it about X2 that you find sort of not worth mentioning?
I mean, both of those things for sure, but then also I just feel like a lot of the characters don't have much to do. And I mean, that's really frustrating with a movie that, is supposed to be about an entire team. And so maybe that goes back to the Wolverine centric problem that I have. But I'm not happy with how Rogue was ever portrayed in the films because, I mean, for one thing, she doesn't, have any of her Miss Marvel powers. And so she's sort of useless.
Or
It's
any of the
just her-
Southern charm.
It's her being able to like touch people and stuff like that, and it's like, who cares about that? And I mean, I never really liked how they did Iceman, not to mention that then you start getting all of the ages out of whack, and it's like, if Iceman's a student, what are we doing here? And it's just, I mean, none of that is right to me. And it's like, maybe I'm a little too much of a stickler when it comes to that kind of stuff, and I don't give enough leeway. But then if I'm too forgiving, you get all of these awful movies, and it's like, maybe their feet should be held to the fire. And I mean, you could have a modern roster where you include people like Storm and Wolverine. I think it's impossible to make an X-Men movie in 2000 and not have those two characters. But do like what they did with the cartoon. And it's like, yeah, Iceman was a part of the team, went off, did his own thing, just like in the comic books. Comes back when he feels like it, and then, he's, button heads with people and that sort of thing.
It's like they didn't have any source material, and they just ran with it.
Yeah, and it's really disturbing, and I mean that's sort of the problem that the modern Star Wars films came up with, where it's like, yeah, we don't have any source material. It's like, well, you do, you're just purposely ignoring it. And then with the X-Men movies, another thing is there's a lot of teasers with the X-Men films, and X2 is guilty of that as well with Colossus. And it's like, hey, Colossus, and it looked really cool, the little part that he was in. And it's like, yeah, but that's all you're gonna get. And it's like, well, all right, we'll get him more in the next movie. Yeah, but not really. And it's just like, that's what continues. I had to wait until
too
Deadpool
much of the budget
to get the actual Colossus, and it's just, that's really disappointing to me. It's kind of like when they totally screw with you in the third X-Men movie with the Sentinel head come crashing down on the ground. It's like, oh damn, Sentinels. No, Danger Room thing, pal. That's the end of it right there. Just that Sentinel head. Don't even think about it. No, we're doing Magneto stuff again.
Ugh,
we're doing a bunch more Magneto stuff.
That is a very good point. I guess, well, let's try and skew back positive. We're gonna revisit Dark Phoenix, which is just, in my opinion, just the worst of the whole franchise. But Mark, what is your favorite X movie?
Gotta say with the first one, I really do. I think there's really something powerful behind it. The scene with Rogue and Wolverine when she like kind of wakes him up from his sleep and he runs her through, and then she steals his life back to heal herself. That's just like an iconic moment in superhero film history that I feel like stands the test of time. I do. I firmly believe. I think people should watch the first one. I don't care if it's different from what you want.
I mean, don't you feel like that they kind of turned Rogue into their version of Jubilee / Kitty Pryde a little bit? They were just sort of didn't really know what to do with her, so they didn't really give us
she's
Rogue.
The launch on point. Yeah, she's the launch point for the younger audience and so forth. But I think whenever you're having a big superhero team dynamic, it's always good to have kind of that viewpoint for wider audiences.
But why do it with Rogue? Why not pick one of the actual characters that they should have done with that?
Because Rogue was big then.
We got no aspect of why she was big. We got none of her trademark personality or her one trademark power, but not the rest of them that she had obtained. It's she never dressed like Rogue, and
never acted like Rogue.
None of the Southern charm. That molasses honeydew drawl. So, I love it when she calls somebody sugar. It's great. Davis, what's your favorite X movie?
Oh, gosh. I would have to go, and it's going to be off of the trilogy. I can't pick one of the trilogy movies. I just won't. So I would either go Logan or Deadpool. It's probably, they're just so different. But I probably would go with Logan.
So I would go with Logan as well. And I think they finally got it right at the very end with how they wanted to do the solo Wolverine films, because X-Men Origins Wolverine is really bad.
You don't want a Deadpool with a shut mouth? That's not you.
It's just awful. Just really, Will I
The
Am
Mirth without a mouth.
yeah, Will I Am was good in that, and it wasn't Taylor Kitsch's fault. That was I was so excited to get Gambit on the big screen, and then nothing. Then we got a whole lot of nothing, and so that was so disappointing. That movie was just a big fail. The Wolverine was light years better, but still ultimately I think suffered from not having a memorable villain and was kind of dull at parts, but was a lot better. And then
I will not take this Silver Samurai bashing anymore.
I like Silver Samurai, but did we get a great version of him in the Wolverine, Jeff?
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. Thank you. That's all
Crickets.
I'm saying. That's all I'm saying.
We got Wolverine in Japan. I mean, I think that's
good.
pretty cool. I mean, it's like that's a big part of his comic book history, and I always enjoyed those stories. So, I mean, it was something, and it was different.
It was certainly progress. That is for sure. But then again, finally with Logan, they put it all together with this is, a really cool solo Wolverine story. And at that point, the universe had been around for so long that you had those nostalgia points just by having Patrick Stewart on screen and talking about the other characters. There was so much, equity invested in that movie. And even I just remember when the trailer came out and it was set to Johnny Cash Hurt, I was bought in immediately, and it didn't disappoint. And, throughout the movie, it alludes to and sort of borrows from one of the great all-time Westerns, Shane, starring Alan Ladd, and even, right up to Logan's funeral, where the, little X-23 or whatever, quotes the movie. I just thought Logan stuck the landing, and it was a phenomenal way for Hugh Jackman to exit the character. They really, really stuck the landing at the end. And I'm glad they did, because Hugh Jackman's one of those guys that cared about the fans and wanted them to be satisfied and happy with the portrayal, and he knew X-Men Origins Wolverine sucked. He's pretty much said as much. And, that's why he was excited about the Wolverine, and then even more proud of the work with Logan. And so I do think that is the best X-Men film, even though, Jeff, I know you would say it's more of a solo film, an X-Man film.
I mean, it's not so much that it's a solo film. I mean, it's definitely, I call it like a scorched earth film, because there's nothing you can do after it. It's just, that's it. And I think that is fine for everything you said about Hugh Jackman's career as Wolverine, because he never did anything but a stellar job. He always was awesome. Wolverine, if anything, became even more popular as he was portraying him. They definitely changed him in the comics and cartoons to even mirror Hugh Jackman more, in terms of height and looks and some of that stuff. So I'm glad he has Logan under his belt. But if I have to say, like, what's the best X-Men movie for an X-Men movie, it's got to be Deadpool. And maybe even the second Deadpool, too. I thought both of those were awesome. I mean, Juggernaut was great in that. We've had Juggernaut in two X-Men movies now. One of them's the real Juggernaut. The other one's not, bitch. That's how it is.
What is it about Deadpool that you like so much, Jeff?
I think that all right, there's a couple of things. One, I feel it, as odd as it sounds, they respect their audience. So they actually do have like a heavy story. Second, I mean, it's an adaptation. They really are understanding the source material and taking what's in the comic books and putting it on screen. It's not going to be one-for-one correspondence. That's impossible. They're different mediums. But damn, do they do a good job, and they really try. And we're talking about Hugh Jackman and his passion for Wolverine. I mean, Ryan Reynolds was fighting tooth and nail to get Deadpool done right. And, I mean, I can tell watching those movies and seeing the interviews and all of the promotion, that's like, that is a guy who read Deadpool, who wants to see a good Deadpool movie. I mean, he wants to sit in the audience and watch a good one too, and he's doing a great job with it. And so I'm really pleased.
You talk about respect for the audience. That is something that I was so struck by in Deadpool. Absolutely spot on, more comedic character, and that's what he should be. Yeah. But even in those movies, more so than a lot of the more recent MCU, they let you feel a moment before having somebody that is known for his one-liners, in his mouth. They let you feel what he is actually feeling as a character. I'll just jump to the sequel. When they kill his wife, they don't have to destroy the emotion of that scene. It's a really emotional scene. It's a more emotional than most of the stuff you get in the MCU. In the MCU, they would have probably had 3 or 4 little jokes. Just don't worry, it's okay. We're still all having fun here. None of this matters. Which completely undermines the whole thing, because if you don't care about it, then how are we supposed to? So that is definitely something I really appreciated about Deadpool. They are well made. They are funny. Mark, what is your stance on Deadpool 1 and 2?
I still haven't seen Deadpool 2. Thanks, James. Spoiler alert. But
that's on you, bro.
I know.
Why,
I know it.
Why
I
you
know
let him
it.
see it?
Hey, you chose to have a child,
bitch.
Mark.
You son of a bitch. But
Nobody made you.
Deadpool was fantastic. I remember when the script originally first leaked years ago, and just reading the first few pages of it, which is basically the opening sequence of him diving through the cars on the freeway and shooting everyone. Just reading that made me excited, and seeing how it actually translated on film was glorious. I mean, that is just fun start to finish. Really no fat on it. The action was superb. They better keep it R for the next one. I know that's a point of contention, but it gave me I think it was kind of revolutionary in what superhero films have been doing as of late, showing that they can go that far, both kind of in silly nature, the intensity of the violence, the breaking of the fourth wall. It did something that other films just didn't try, and it worked, and I think it was a huge success for them, so that they keep going down this path. So hopefully,
Yeah, I know they kept you as a viewer with the sequel.
Yeah.
So and don't worry, but Mark, by the time you see 2, your sweet little one will be probably old enough to see a PG-13 Deadpool 3. So that'll be great. I wanna circle back to the First Class series for a minute, because I talked about the First Class, the actual First Class of Beast, Angel, Iceman, Cyclops, Jean Grey. One of the great sins of the First Class franchise is how do you end up with Darwin, with Havoc, and these other X-Men characters as your supposed First Class? It is, to me, inexcusable. Jeff, what, I know you like First Class, but isn't it just completely sort of shot from the start there with that? You have Havoc and not Cyclops?
Well, I think, and you'll probably bring this up again, that it's like they're still trying to hold on to the lore, the story, the world that they had created with the first 3 X-Men movies, and it's a soft reboot, whatever the hell we were talking about the last episode. So I mean, they're still interconnected, and so they decided to flip Havoc as the older brother and Cyclops as the younger, not knowing that already screws up what they said in the first X-Men movie, that Cyclops, Jean Grey, and Storm were 3 of his first students.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's like, so you can't do First Class the way you did it. You can't do First Class the way the comic book has it, because of what you already said in the first movie. Unless you abandon those movies, and then we can just start anew. In which case, yeah, I don't know why you can't just do the actual First Class. I would have preferred it. I also think, I mean, the relationship between those characters, I do like First Class, but one thing that you don't really get in the movie is not all of the characters are really that rich, and they don't have that many interactions with each other. And Banshee was like totally wasted.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And that was always a sticking point with me, that you went with those characters as your First Class. Such an important sort of distinction.
I like the movie for Xavier and Magneto.
That
and
one, and
Sebastian Shaw, actually. I thought Kevin Bacon did a pretty good job.
He did a good job. I thought, what's her name? January Jones was a nothing in that movie as White Queen. I just thought that was a complete waste. I like the fact that it's a period movie. I think that helps superhero films in general, because if you have to suspend your disbelief to another time, then it just sort of helps the immersion. So I like that aspect of it, but I've never been able to get beyond the fact that that's your First Class. Like, I'm out on this. And then as they went along, the just shoehorning of Mystique, because Jennifer Lawrence's star rose, and then she would ultimately betray them, openly bitching about how she didn't want to wear the blue makeup. That's the character, honey. That's it. That's Mystique. It's just, It was ridiculous. It just got the idea that she was not only in the X-Men, but the focal point of the X-Men by the end of her tenure in the franchise. To me, inexcusable, unforgivable. I do not like those movies. First Class to me is okay. Days of Future Past is okay. Worth it for Kelsey Grammer's Beast cameo at the very end. Sorry, Mark, if you haven't seen that. But Apocalypse.
I saw it.
I know. But Apocalypse and Dark Phoenix. Dark Phoenix, is a worse version of X3. They took a template from X3 and they made it even worse. And X3 was so maligned when it came out, even in spite of the Oscar-worthy performance that Kelsey Grammer gave. Jeff, does Dark Phoenix to you rate as the very worst in the franchise?
It is the very worst. I will say Cyclops had a couple of good action scenes in that movie, so maybe that's like the one little bit takeaway I can get from there. No, I think it's the absolute worst because I thought the Apocalypse film, whatever it was called, I don't know. There's still a couple of good things about it. There's nothing redeeming about that film at all. Start to end, it was awful. It was boring. The aliens were boring. The Phoenix, they never even had it as like an actual entity or some sort of personality. There's no real struggle with it. And I like Sansa Stark just fine, but I mean, she did nothing with it. I mean, it was awful acting as well.
I mean, you want to talk about Silver Samurai sort of having a dull portrayal in the Wolverine. The villains in Dark Phoenix, the only discernible thing is that they say they're aliens and they wear suits and they have weird powers that they just do. It was so bad. I was beside myself. I had low expectations for it, and it shattered them. You were breaking the ceiling. It went through the effing floor of the basement down into the earth. It was so bad. And Davis, I know you have a specific reason of why you haven't seen it.
I have been so turned off from this franchise as much as I love it. And I saw the trailer come out. I was like, there's no way this movie's going to be good. I just couldn't. And it's on, I believe
true.
it's on one of the streaming services right now, I believe, or HBO, one of the two, just something I can watch for free right now. And I still won't. I can't fathom spending 2 more hours of putting myself through that awful rendition of what they think is the X-Men.
What about the time where Davis finally watched Dark Phoenix? Not this time.
Our writers made it up.
You guys are going to have
like
to
a
make
Patreon event.
It could be. It very well could be, as we are on the Tenno Media Network, the worldwide leader in the fighting game community and all streaming entertainment. Let's move on from the films and let's touch on some of the video games. I know we did a little bit earlier, but I think one of the most sort of nostalgic arcade games ever has to be the X-Men arcade game, right, Davis?
Definitely. You think X-Men video games, you think X-Men arcade games. It's still a staple. If you go to arcades right now, it's still there. And I will guarantee almost 75% of arcades will have that game.
I played it in Portland just at the start of 2020.
Exactly. And that's what all these retro arcades, well, I guess they're retro arcades now. You have to have the X-Men game. Like, people want to see it, and it's still going to eat up every single quarter you got.
Jeff, what is your take on X-Men arcade?
No, the arcade game is amazing. I used to play it all the time in the movie theater when I was a kid. It definitely still is. If you can find an arcade, it definitely still is an arcade. Yeah, I mean, I don't think I can add anything more than what Davis said.
But yeah, and then the other X-Men games, if you played Sega and you played Lion King, you thought that was hard? Play the X-Men game. That game's impossible, man.
That has such unforgivable like cliffs and like, as far as anything with jumping goes, it's beautiful looking for the time. I was blown away by how cool that game was. Because I mean, I was a Mario Legend of Zelda guy. It's like, oh my God, those are just X-Men characters on the screen right now. But yeah, damn, is it difficult.
Yeah, and if you want an X-Men team experience, you have to go with X-Men Legends 2. I think is better than the original. That really combines the powers of your team. It's not a perfect game by any means, but I think you get a sense of what it means to be an X-Men team in that game for sure.
I love Jeff talking about the difficulty level. Jeff, how do you beat Sabretooth in that in that same
Oh,
game?
that was the Wolverine Nintendo
Oh, that was
game.
the Wolverine
That
game.
was just quintessential Nintendo games back then, where it's like they explain nothing to you. You're fighting Sabretooth at the end. I'm punching the hell out of him with the claws. I don't know if I'm doing damage to him or not. I have to walk. I forget how far. All of a sudden, there's a cliff, and you're supposed to make Sabretooth jump over you off the cliff. That's how it ends. You can't hurt him. It's the only character in the entire game you can't hurt, and there's no reference to it whatsoever. I don't know how I beat it. It's by accident.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's not like you had the internet then to look up, hey,
That's what I'm
who's
saying.
figured out a way to
Bizarre.
beat this guy? You know, I
You
guess
know
if
what? That's how
had maybe
games should be.
the Game Informer or something like that. I'm glad you brought up X-Men Legends, Davis, because those both were. It was what was the that's the X-Men equivalent of what was it? Ultimate Alliance.
Yeah, and the X-Men are in that too, and
they are, but this one is an X-Men centric one, and it was a lot of fun. And that is, you're right, that is the greatest sort of like team X-Men experience that you can get. It's not exactly like KOTOR or anything like that, but you can bring a squad with you of your favorite X-Men, and that is very cool. Marvel versus Capcom with the X-Men, very well represented in there. I know I did, mocap for that franchise. Not a lot of people know that I did some of the motion capture for Marvel versus Capcom, but you may remember me as the mocap guy for Gambit. So
my first
that's why the controls are so stiff.
My first college living experience, my roommates and I built an arcade cabinet, and the game that was mostly played was Marvel vs. Capcom 2. It was if we're settling something, it's on Marvel vs. Capcom 2. If you did something wrong in the apartment, you got to back it up by beating that other person at that game. And that was so much fun, and they just nailed the characters' powers in that game so well and combined them really well. It was just classic, man.
We would be remiss if we didn't talk about some of the other series very quickly that X-Men has done, because it's not just on film, it's not just the animated series. But Mark, I know you're a big fan of the show Legion, which of course is stars the star of The Guest. So we're big fans of his here on the Best Damn Nerd Show. Mark, what is your take on Legion?
Yeah, that's right. Dan Stevens was exceptional. Legion follows, of course, Legion, the schizophrenic son of Professor X. They get into that a little bit into the series, but it just actually wrapped up its series last year. So it ran for 3 seasons, and it is so incredibly well done. It was done on AMC, which some of their comic adaptation properties that they've been putting out are just phenomenal. And what Legion did is it did a great job of putting you in like the mind of a schizophrenic, and both like when you're in like the asylums and these different like people that are playing in his head. Spoiler, they end up bringing in Shadow King as big bad, obviously, and just the way that it's really pieced together and shot, the use of music.
I thought Legion was on FX.
It is an FX show.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah,
man,
FX show. Hey,
did you even watch the show?
But I do highly recommend you watch it. It's something, if you're looking for something that very different and definitely different from a lot of the other X-Men like movies and things like that, this really delivers. It's very thought-provoking, and I can't mention enough just how beautifully it's shot and pieced together. It is a trip. It's something definitely worth binging.
Yeah, Dan Stevens was great in that. Again, star of The Guest, which you haven't seen. You need to watch that
always
first.
be David to us.
Yeah, exactly. David is in that. So if you haven't seen The Guest,
he's David in this. David Haller.
Yeah, I told you he'll always be David to us.
He's always a David.
What did you not understand, Mark?
Yeah, do yourself a favor. Watch The Guest and then watch Legion. I would.
On
yeah. Oh no, on AMC apparently. I have to.
On some streaming service now.
Yeah.
I have to mention a little bit off the beaten path, but the short-lived Pete Holmes show, he did a series of skits called The X-Men, which was EX, where he is playing a very funny version of Charles Xavier, where he is sort of doing performance reviews of all the X-Men and shitting on why they are fired and everything like that. And it's very funny. The one that he does for Angel is my absolute favorite because he goes like in so hard on Angel and how stupid of a X-Men he is. I don't agree with it, but his take is great because he's like, you just fly. Do you know how many X-Men fly and do something else amazing? You just fly, and it's by literally flapping your wings. So they're all on YouTube. Look up Pete Holmes X-Men. You won't be disappointed. Welcome back to the Best Damn Nerd Show X-Travaganza. We've talked a lot of X-Men here tonight, and we are going to now turn to what everybody loves to argue about, and that's a good list, or a bad list, as it were, as they most often are. You know, there's always disagreements that come from a list, but you would think that when the company that put out the said property would maybe get it more right than most, but when Marvel.com put out a list of the greatest X-Men characters, in my opinion, and I believe probably in the opinion of all of my co-hosts here tonight, that they really missed the mark in terms of the greatest X-Men of all time. And I'm just going to take it from 15 on down here. They did the top 50, but let's go with 15 because the X-Men roster is stacked. So there's gonna be some hurt feelings no matter what you do with just so many.
Apparently, it's not stacked according to these people.
Well, yeah, they have some interesting inclusions here. Well, I guess let's go up to 25. We'll go halfway through the list here. Banshee at 25, North Star 24, 23 is Cannonball, 22 Bishop, then followed by Havoc, Rachel Gray, Dazzler, Jubilee, Angel coming in at 17, Emma Frost at 16, 15, my guy Gambit, 14. At 14 is Professor Charles Xavier, which is just obscene that he is at 14. 13 is Cable, 12 Iceman, then Psylocke, Magneto at 10. Their greatest villain ranks higher than Professor Charles Xavier on Marvel's list. Then Jean Grey at 9, followed by Colossus, my girl Rogue, Cyclops at 6, not cracking the top 5. 5 Wolverine, 4 Storm, 3 Beast, 2 Nightcrawler, and 1 Kitty Pryde. So there's a lot to unpack with that top 25. I think just most glaringly Professor X being that high up. And Jeff, I know you and I were talking earlier and we've reflected on this before, but in my opinion, there are only 3 names that could vie for the number 1 spot. And, as much as, we may like Kitty Pryde is not among them. The 3 names that have an argument for number 1 are Professor X, Wolverine, and Cyclops. It's those 3 and everybody else behind them, in my opinion. Jeff, what did you think of this list by Marvel?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's a product of the times and also who they are possibly pushing, things like that. So I mean, I'm not that surprised. I'm still disappointed in the list. And I'm also not surprised that Angel is the most disrespected of the original team. I feel like he always is the most disrespected of the original team. Storm being ahead of Cyclops, I know it's only by a couple of spots, but I mean, she on numerous occasions has talked about how Cyclops is a better leader than her, is the true leader of the team. I mean, as much as I give Wolverine shit, if he beat Cyclops out and was number 1 instead of Cyclops, I'd be totally fine with it. I personally would put Charles Xavier as number 1 because he founded the X-Men, and like I said, he may or may not be the most important person in Marvel universe. And I have a problem with Magneto being in the top 10 just because he is their enemy. So it's hard for me because I know of all the things that he's done since, and how he has been a member of the team and different versions of him and how he led the X-Men in different scenarios. It's just, I don't know. I have a major problem with it. Kitty Pryde, I've never been wowed by her as much as other people. So, I mean, not only should she not be number 1, she shouldn't be in the top 5. I think she could be in the top 10, most likely top 15. That's where I would put her. Nightcrawler, I mean, once again, it's a character that I don't think should be in the top 5, probably not top 10. Beast, I mean, I would rank him at best 3rd of the original X-Men. So, I mean, I certainly don't see him as 3rd overall X-Men.
Yeah, no, that's, I mean, valid points. I think, you brought something up that in terms of that. Even you, somebody who has grown to hate but begrudgingly respect the Wolverine character,
and I recognize his importance to the title. You know,
absolutely.
I mean, he brought me to the X-Men, so it's like I get it. And
to me, putting Wolverine at number 1 makes the most sense because he is the most standalone character. He's the character that's, sort of built the most bridges outside the X-Men, that's probably put the most butts in seats for the X-Men. So I totally could see Wolverine as number 1. But Kitty Pryde on Marvel's own list, a company that loves Wolverine, that will shoehorn Wolverine in at any. I was blown away that Wolverine would not be number 1 on this list and in where they put him. But you could certainly argue Xavier. My top 5, what I had is I put Wolverine 1, Xavier 2, Cyclops 3, and then probably go with Rogue at 4, which is more of a personal choice because I think a lot of people would probably put Storm there, but it would be Rogue and Storm, 4 and 5 right there in terms of rounding out what I would have. But obviously, lists are made to be debated and argued about. But Davis, what did you think of Marvel's list, and maybe just what you would do differently?
It's like they only listen to you and I, James, because Nightcrawler and Beast in the top 3. It's like they're just trying to appease us.
Well, they didn't. They didn't do that love for Gambit.
No, but in reality, they're doing themselves a disservice because it's not credible now. Like I saw this list. I see the top 3. I tear it up and throw it out the window. This is absurd. And you have to go back. I don't know when this. It looks like it was made a few years back. Like what comics were they making at this time? Because they had to be pushing something with Nightcrawler, something with Kitty Pryde.
Boom. Yep.
That's the only reason I see this happening. Because I agree with you, James and Jeff. It's the top 3 are Professor X, Wolverine, and Cyclops in that order in my eyes. And I think, the 2 behind that, I would put Storm and Magneto. And with that top 5, I put it that way because those are 5 characters I don't think you can have an X-Men without. Like,
that's a fair point.
Any of the others, Jean Grey is pretty close. I'd probably put her 6.
See, she's my number 5, but yeah.
Yeah, and you put though people after any character after that, I could probably mix and match after that. But those top 6, I don't think you have the X-Men without those top 6. And if those aren't in there, and you can substitute maybe 1 or 2, and I'll still respect the list a little bit. But this is just absurd.
I actually have to. Well, one, I think you make a solid point about why you could include Magneto so low on the list. It's still, to me, if you're doing an X-Man list, it's hard for me to justify that, but I get your reasoning behind it. And I have to agree and make an addendum to my own that I don't think you can have a top 5 without Jean Grey, just given how important she is. She was a first-class member of the Phoenix Saga, that whole deal. But Marco, how do you come down on this list?
Well, I want to say at the time this came out, Kitty Pryde was the leader of the X-Men and running Xavier School post his death. So that's probably the narrative as to the birth of this list you see here.
Shining a light.
Just a lot of the people in it, I do like. I feel like I gotta say something though about number 11, Psylocke. Tad bit overrated. She looked cool. And Jim Lee did a great job on her, but
yeah, he did.
Nothing there. Even Olivia Munn's role,
yeah. Well,
the worst.
So, yeah, I don't. I feel like that character in particular is really overrated. I mean, she is pretty great in Marvel vs. Capcom too.
Best assist in Marvel vs. Capcom 2. That is absolutely
right.
Throw
some bows.
Great call, Mark.
Dazzler also way overrated. Come on, she was like a pop star.
Dude, I mean, she's ridiculous on that list, but like, I don't even know if I consider her overrated because it's like, who even remembers Dazzler for the most part? She kind of like pops up randomly, and it's like, oh, hey, yeah, her.
They gave her own series again recently.
She's ahead of Havoc, and it's so weird to me. That guy led X Factor in the 90s. He led an X-Men group in another dimension. I mean, he's a Summers.
Yeah,
I think Magic should be further up than where she is too, though.
Where is she even on the list? I didn't even notice her.
28.
Oh yeah, that's
I mean,
absurd.
she should definitely at least be in top 20. I mean, there's a lot of big names on here and heavy hitters, but she is. I mean, she rules over all of hell. And
The
So where Dark
Colossus, I
Phoenix
feel like
is.
she almost has a bigger role than Colossus in most recent comics.
Yeah, the lamer ones,
yeah.
but Colossus is better.
Yeah, you
and I'm
got-
excited
yeah,
to see her
overall
in
history.
New Mutants that they're putting her in there.
I want to
Ain't
point
nobody
out
seeing that.
Yeah.
that in the most recent trilogy, the character they focus on the most, Mystique, is number 30.
I was going to make the same point, Davis. That is excellent deduction by you, sir. She
30.
to me, she shouldn't even be on the list at all because her main role was to be an X-Men villain. And not even a top tier one at that until the animated series made her more important. And it's just been a steady sort of progression since then. So yeah, that is hilarious. This is still a relatively recent list in the in the X canon. And yes, she did not get as high up. We talk about Beast, one of my favorite X-Men, probably only behind Gambit in terms of my absolute favorites, but he doesn't belong at number 3. It's just, I know he's one of the originals, but it's just your top 3 are Kitty Pryde, Nightcrawler, and Beast. And that's just what I keep circling back to, is that you don't have Cyclops, Wolverine, or Xavier represented there. I look at Xavier at 14, and you have Magneto, his arch nemesis, and the complete antithesis to his whole worldview and what makes the X-Men go. You have him ranked higher. Whoever made this list, and I know they've tried to scrub it from the internet, but it is, we always remember. So we will find it. Whoever made this list just doesn't know
Now,
X-Men.
Maybe you guys can help me out. Namor, was he originally in X-Men before he came into his own? I know he's shown up in titles, and I want to say he was even one of the Phoenix 5 during AVX, but I never think of him as an X-Man.
No, well, no, because Submariner predates the X-Men.
Yes.
Right.
And he fought in World War II. He is Marvel's first superhero.
Yes.
And then in the original Human Torch, he is a mutant.
I always find it weird when he's
on
used.
his father's side. That's technically what those stupid little wings on his heels are. That's like his mutant ability. But to have him on this list is embarrassing. I think I'm more pissed off about that because at least with Magneto and Mystique, they have been on X-Men rosters. They are in X-Men comics. Davis made a good point about how you can't really have the X-Men without Magneto. You certainly can't have an X-Men movie without Magneto. So
apparently.
But yeah, Namor, it's like, come on, you're embarrassing yourself when you do things like that. And it just I mean, I don't take anything that Marvel says seriously anymore. It doesn't really matter. But I mean, it's still kind of disheartening when they're, still the official voice and this is the list that they created.
Jeff, if you could just officially give us what your top 5 is.
Top 5 would be Xavier, Cyclops over Wolverine, and that's I love Cyclops, and he's the leader of the
one,
X-Men.
half a dozen of another,
And then Storm and Jean Grey, you could kind of go back and forth with 4 and 5. I put Storm at 4 because I greatly prefer to Jean Grey. I just think she's a better character, better leader, cooler power set, all of that. But I mean, that's my top 5.
Davis, do you have a fleshed out top 5?
I would stick to what I said with earlier. It was Professor X, Wolverine, Cyclops, Storm, Magneto.
Yeah.
Marco, do you have a final 5?
Final 5. Let me see. Give me a Cyclops. Give me a Wolverine. Dig me some Iceman. Who else we got in there? Colossus and Rogue.
Colossus.
Bobby Drake getting some love.
Yeah.
Well, Mark, I'm glad that
fantastic.
You and I stand with being the only ones that have Rogue in our top 5, which I appreciate. So. She's just one of my favorites. So maybe a bit of a sentimental pick, but she is important in the grand scheme of things. But I don't want to dwell, on a negative list or anything as we end tonight. I want to end tonight with what you hope for the future of these X-Men properties, and what do you think the legacy of the X-Men is? And Jeff, we'll start with you.
Couple of things. In terms of a video game, I'd love to see something that's sort of like tactics based or Fire Emblem. So you're controlling the individual characters like on a closed board, like mini battles and stuff like that, and then there's story in between. I think that would be really cool. And then movie-wise, just thinking of the MCU, I want quality introduction. I was thinking MCU's sort of at this crossroads right now. It would be kind of cool if they just sort of slow rolled mutants are sort of becoming more to the forefront. People are identifying that these exist now. I'd love for it to be original class.
Yes.
Because I want X-Men ground up. It's like we're just building the X-Men team. And what I would also do is then Wolverine standalone movie. And then he can later join the X-Men in second or third one. Honestly, I don't think you need much with the original X-Men, and then you can throw in more of the heavy hitters.
Do you see Hugh Jackman returning to the role?
I don't want Hugh Jackman returning to the role. I think Logan was a great way for him to end it. Also, I mean, the guy's getting older, and he even talked about, I mean, the workout regime to get into Logan shape is rough and very telling. I mean, it was 20 years ago X-Men came out.
Yeah, he's not actually a mutant.
Yeah, exactly. And at a certain point, like, we do need to turn the corner. We've got to move on. And so I would want somebody younger for the part. I'd want someone also to try to be closer to the original. Exactly. Someone a little shorter. I'm not ruling out like the Daniel Radcliffe thing and stuff like that people were saying. It's like, I wouldn't mind like an actor that I think is okay. And also I feel like kind of fits the look a little bit better and stuff like that.
Who is short and who is ageless? Ladies and gentlemen, Tom Cruise. There's your Wolverine. Bingo. Guy prints money, box office star, so you got your standalone Wolverine right there. Finally doesn't have to hide his height anymore. Book it. We're on cruise control. Mark, what is your hope for the future of the X properties?
What I think is just with dealing with mutants in that respect, especially with Disney Plus service as it is now, is they should be developing this into a full flushed out series where they touch these characters. They don't have to be saved for the big screen. You can still have it translate to films that hit the big screen for major events. Makes sense. But I'd like to see a real series done on it. Now, I know recently there was the Gifted series on Fox where it was a live action and dabbled around basically following the demise of, did a great job of, including Warpath and Polaris and the Cuckoos, right? The Stepford sisters. Like, they used a lot of these characters that were still great and did a good job of putting it in this post X-Men world. But let's get in and actually have them all. There's just so much that could be done on a series and running it through that channel. I think that'd be the best bet.
Davis, what do you hope to see?
Well, I will say I am excited for what is coming already in August, which is the New Mutant movie. It's going to be a horror take on it. So we might get the Demon Bear. Who knows? But outside of that, I hope they take some time away from it. I hope Marvel kind of takes some time, lets everybody breathe. Maybe, pepper in some vocab around it in the next couple movies in the series. I'm sure they will, because they do own the properties now. And then, 4 or 5 years, do what you want on the movies. That's fine. I'm not going to tell you which one to do. However, do not do the Phoenix Saga. You wait. You motherfuckers wait. You wait 10 more years to do that. I swear to God.
The Phoenix Force is so powerful, not even Hollywood can contain it.
But yeah, do it justice. Do the original First Class. You have the source material. Don't screw up where the other ones failed. But just go back to what is going well. And it's just do that. That's all I'm asking.
Just be Roy.
Just be true to what it is, and I think they will. I think they understand what they need to do with it now because of how much it's failed.
I hope they certainly do it justice within the MCU. Given the sort of paint by numbers approach that a lot of the more recent MCU films have gone with, I'm not necessarily holding my breath on that front. But in terms of which class they should do, why can't we get an X-Men movie that sort of, the First Class has already happened and it's the original First Class, so we can have Beast and Jean Grey and Cyclops and Iceman and Angel, that they had their time sort of as the students, and then we can get that sort of that 90s classic roster with, give me Gambit in the X-Men on the big screen if we're going to do this again. I would love to see it. I don't want to start with a Gambit standalone film. He's my favorite X-Men. Would I watch it? Of course, but I like him within the confines of the X-Men, flirting with Rogue. Give me a true Rogue on the big screen that we haven't gotten. Give me those characters. Give me more Nightcrawler. Give me more Colossus in the confines of a traditional X-Men group. That's what I would like to see. What do you view in terms of the legacy of the X-Men are? And Jeff, we'll start with you again.
Well, I mean, I think Chris kind of touched on it before. I wrote down a few things. The lasting legacy is that, shines a light in a way that young readers can understand, like racism, bigotry, hate groups, also just like puberty, because, I mean, that's when mutant powers come up. So it's about changing bodies and everything like that. I mean, as a small child, can you really understand the Holocaust? Can you really understand racism? I mean, I don't think so, but I feel like the X-Men put it in a way where, you get these moral tales, and you kind of start getting these ideals and ideologies, and you kind of understand what it does mean to be good to your fellow man. And then as you get older, you start getting faced with what's going on in real life, but you still have those lessons that you learned when you were younger. And that's why I think X-Men is also just more important than most other comic books. They are a family.
Yes.
They touched on more important issues than anything else. I also feel that they're on the forefront when it comes to touching on most things. We briefly mentioned North Star on that list. He was an out and proud gay superhero before that was a gimmick, and before that was something to try to sell comic books. And it's like he just was a gay character, and that was fine, and it's like, and I feel that's just what the X-Men and all of the side titles are, since I use Alpha Flight, but you know what I mean. It's just that
Yes.
entire whole self-contained universe was really good about just broadening children's horizons and getting them to understand how different isn't worse, and we're all on this planet together.
Yeah, the differences can make us stronger. I think that's so well put, and you really got at the heart of why they are the greatest superhero team, because they are also a superhero family, unlike so many other ones. I know the Fantastic Four are in there, but the things that they
Yeah.
talk about, the third rail issues that they talk about, that are digestible for young people, so that when if you grew up an X-Men fan, I do think it's easier for you to sort of see these things going on and be like, no, that's not right. And so that's important. That has legitimate value to us as a society, maybe now more than ever. And so I really, I always think about, Storm saying to Jubilee in one of the early episodes, it might have even been Night of the Sentinels. I think it was, people fear what they do not understand. And that is such like a crucible for the X-Men in their very existence. Mark, what is to expand on maybe what Jeff said, or your own, what is the legacy of the X-Men to you?
I think it's always just like, try not to be afraid of those that are different, is what it always comes down to, because it lets you get into the minds of all these characters that are feared for their powers and what they could be, but lets you understand who they are as the person within. And you sympathize with them, and you relate to them, and they're the heroes of the story, and they just want that normal life that we all take for granted. And I think that's probably what the most powerful thing coming out of it.
And finally, a final word from our resident professor from the School for Gifted Youngsters.
Well, I don't think I can say it better than what Jeff and Mark already did. But as a franchise, I will say the X-Men, the people behind it have been leaders, and in a lot of what they've done, and that touches on why they're so big, and because it touches so many people. But going back to when Chris Claremont started on the series, it was just so different what he was doing. And even the video games we mentioned earlier, the arcade X-Men game, that was huge. I mean, that started a type of game that you saw the Avengers come out with one, the Simpsons, all that. The X-Men have just always been leaders with that, and hopefully that they continue to look to do that, because I think they have the perfect medium to do that, and continue to make a difference.
Well, I can think of no better place to end this Best Damn Nerd Show X-Travaganza. Great talking, X-Men. Again, the greatest superhero team in the history of superhero teams. That is going to do it for us this week. Big thank you to everyone on the show. And of course, a big thank you to the Tenno Media Network, the worldwide leader in the fighting game community and all streaming entertainment. But that is going to do it for us this week. Have a great week, everyone. And remember, if you're a nerd, always say it loud and say it proud.
Cyclops was right.
No, he wasn't.
Well, Cyclops is right, just not what.
Not
That's
Mark
not the right
Cyclops.
Cyclops.
Hashtag not my Cyclops.